The intelligence officer slammed his folder shut and leaned back in his chair with a smirk that made Captain Daniel Rhodes want to put his fist through the wall. Light resistance, the man said again, tapping the map with 2 fingers like he was correcting a child. A handful of irregulars with rifles. Your team will be in and out before breakfast. Rhodes stared at the casualty estimates the man had scribbled in the margin. He stared at the circled canyon coordinates. He stared at the word acceptable, written beside a number that represented human lives. He said nothing, but something in his chest turned to stone. If you've never heard this story, stay with us until the very end and drop a comment telling us what city you are watching from. We want to see how far this story has traveled. The briefing had lasted 47 minutes, and in that time, Captain Daniel Rhodes had asked the same question 4 different ways and received 4 different versions of the same non-answer. What is the confidence level on the resistance assessment? The intelligence officer, a man named Garrett, who wore pressed civilian clothes and had never once, to Rhodes's knowledge, spent a night in the field, had flipped through his papers with the calm of someone who believed the papers were the world. High confidence, Garrett said. Signals intercepts corroborate the human intelligence. You're looking at a small armed contingent guarding the hostages, 12, maybe 15 personnel, poorly coordinated, no heavy weapons confirmed. Rhodes had looked around the room. His team leaders were seated along the wall. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb, Senior Chief Ray Dominguez, Petty Officers Kowalski, Tran, and Harmon. Every one of them wore the same expression. Not fear. Something closer to the look a man gets when he smells smoke but can't find the fire. No heavy weapons confirmed, Rhodes repeated. Correct. Meaning the absence of confirmation is not confirmation of absence. Garrett blinked. Captain, the intelligence picture is solid. We have 3 independent sources placing the guard complement at under 20 fighters. The exfil window is tight, which is why the mission timeline needs to move. The mission timeline, Rhodes said slowly, is what I'm asking about. If we're wheels up in 4 hours and the intel picture shifts on the ground, then you adapt. That's what your team does. Rhodes had looked at Marcus Webb at that moment. Webb was 41 years old, built like a man, assembled from separate machines, and had been on more combat deployments than anyone in the room would ever count. He met Rhodes's eyes and gave the smallest possible shake of his head. Not a disagreement, more like a man acknowledging that some arguments could not be won before the shooting started, only after. So Rhodes had signed the operation order. And 4 hours later, 12 SEALs had dropped into the black mouth of the canyon. The desert at night has a particular kind of silence that civilians never experience, and combat veterans never forget. It is not peaceful silence. It is the silence of a held breath of the moment between the lightning and the thunder. Rhodes had grown up in central Montana, had hunted elk in mountains that could swallow a man whole, and even he felt it the second the helicopters peeled away and the rotor wash disappeared into the darkness above them. The canyon was too quiet. Webb came up beside him without being called. That was one of Webb's gifts. He always knew when Rhodes needed someone at his shoulder before Rhodes knew it himself. You feel that, Webb said, barely moving his lips. Yeah. Not right. No. The team moved in a diamond formation down the canyon floor, Harmon and Tran on the flanks, Kowalski walking point 20 meters ahead. The hostage location was a stone structure, roughly 800 meters north, a converted storage building that the intelligence package described as lightly fortified. Their approach route traced the eastern wall of the canyon using the natural shadow line to mask their movement. Kowalski stopped. Rhodes saw him hold up a fist, and the entire team froze without a sound. Kowalski was crouched over something on the ground. He turned back and held up 2 fingers, then pointed down. Footprints. Fresh. Multiple sets. Going in multiple directions. Rhodes felt it then, not fear, not quite, but the cold premonition that the math of this situation had already been calculated by someone else, and the answer was not in their favor. He keyed his radio to the tactical frequency. All elements hold position. We have sign of significant foot traffic at grid. The first machine gun opened up from the northern wall of the canyon. The sound was enormous, a deep rhythmic hammering that turned the night into chaos in an instant. Tracer rounds cut across the canyon floor like red threads being pulled through dark fabric, and Rhodes was already moving, screaming into his radio, throwing himself behind a boulder that weighed more than a truck, while rounds sparked and shrieked off the stone around him. Contact north, heavy weapons, north wall. Then the second gun opened up from the south. Rhodes pressed his back against the rock and understood in a single terrible second what had happened. They were not approaching a guard post. They were inside an ambush, a deliberate, prepared, pre-positioned ambush with interlocking fields of fire that had been designed by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. "Webb!" he shouted. "Here!" Webb's voice came from 6 meters to his left, behind a shallow rock formation that provided cover from the north but nothing from the east. "South gun is elevated, 40-50 meters up the canyon wall. We can't suppress it from down here." "How many do you see?" "I can't see anything, Dan. I can't see anything." That was when the RPG hit. The explosion turned the world white and then very, very loud. The shockwave hit Rhodes like a physical wall, and he tasted blood from where his teeth had cut the inside of his cheek. 15 meters ahead of him, the boulder that Kowalski had been sheltering behind was simply gone, replaced by a cloud of dust and rock fragments. "Kowalski!" Rhodes screamed. I'm up! I'm up!" Kowalski's voice was raw and shaking, but it was there. "I'm hit! It's the arm! I'm up!" Rhodes got his breathing under control by sheer will. He pressed his radio transmit. "Bravo 6, this is Bravo Actual. We are in contact. We are taking casualties. We need air support and extraction at grid November Kilo." The voice that came back was not what he expected. It was calm, bureaucratically calm, the calm of someone sitting in a room with fluorescent lighting and a cup of coffee. "Bravo Actual, this is operations. Air assets are currently engaged in a priority tasking. No rotary wing available for your grid. What is your status?" Rhodes stared at the radio for a moment that felt like it had no edges. "Operations, we are in a prepared ambush. I say again, prepared ambush. Multiple heavy weapons emplacements. We need air support now." "Bravo Actual, we copy. Earliest availability for air support, 0300. Can you maintain position?" 0300, that was 6 hours and 40 minutes from now. Webb crawled up beside him, pressing himself against the rock. His face was cut above one eye, and he was breathing hard. "What did they say?" Rhodes told him. Webb looked at him for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, 6.5 hours. "Yeah. Against this?" "Yeah." Webb looked out at the tracer fire stitching the canyon floor. Another RPG detonated 40 meters south. Somewhere in the darkness, Dominguez was shouting coordinates into his own radio, trying to organize a perimeter out of 12 men being hit from 3 directions simultaneously. "Okay," Webb said. He said it the way a man says a word when there are no other words. Rhodes keyed the team frequency. "All elements listen up. We hold. We find cover. We set defensive positions. We do not break formation. Air support is 6 hours out. We have been in worse." He was not entirely sure that was true, but it was the thing that needed to be said. 3 kilometers away, in a mobile communications trailer parked behind the main staging area, Corporal Emily Carter heard the same radio traffic. She had been awake since the mission launched. Not because she had been ordered to monitor, she had not. Her assigned duty for this operation was communication support and signal relay, which meant she sat in a trailer and made sure radio frequencies stayed clean and logs stayed accurate. It was the kind of job that kept her safe. It was the kind of job she had been given because the men above her in the chain of command had decided at various points in her career that keeping her safe was more manageable than acknowledging what she could actually do. Emily was 29 years old. She had grown up in rural Wyoming, the daughter of a cattle rancher who had given up trying to have a son and taught his daughter everything he would have taught one. She had shot her first rifle at age 6. She had killed her first deer at 10. By 16, she could shoot consistently at ranges that grown men with expensive equipment struggled to match. And she had done it with patience and mathematics and a complete disregard for the people who told her she was unlikely. She had joined the Army at 21 with scores on her marksmanship assessments that should have opened every door available to a person with her ability. Instead, the doors had opened to a series of reassignments that politely relocated her away from any role where her shooting might matter. She was too precise, her evaluating officers had written without apparent irony. She made other shooters look bad. She was a morale problem. What they meant, though, none of them had the courage to write it plainly, was that she made them feel unnecessary. Emily had learned to stop arguing. She had learned to sit quietly, do her assigned work, and use every spare hour to maintain skills that no one around her wanted to acknowledge. She ran ballistic calculations in her notebook. She logged wind data. She studied terrain maps, not because anyone asked her to, but because she could not stop herself from solving problems that she was not supposed to know existed. She had looked at the mission planning and materials for tonight's operation 3 days ago. Not because she had clearance, she had made sure not to access anything restricted, but the terrain data was in the shared planning drive, and the canyon coordinates were in the logistics package, and Emily had the kind of mind that assembled puzzles from fragments without being able to stop. She had stared at the northern ridge. It was marked as inaccessible in the planning documents. Too steep, too exposed during approach. The planners had dismissed it in a single sentence during the briefing she had attended in her communications capacity, seated along the back wall with the other support personnel, invisible as furniture. She had raised her hand. The briefing officer, a major named Crest, who had the particular confidence of a man who had never been told no by anyone he respected, had looked at her the way a person looks at something they did not expect to have an opinion. "Yes, Corporal." "The northern ridge," Emily said. "If a shooter could reach it, the sight lines cover every exit from the canyon floor. You'd have full overwatch on all 3 identified enemy approach routes." The silence that followed was the kind that has texture. Major Crest had smiled the smile that men like him used as a substitute for engagement. "The northern ridge is an 800-meter technical climb over hostile terrain with no cover during approach. It's not a viable position. With the right timing and route?" "Thank you, Corporal." She had sat back down. The man beside her, a communications sergeant named Fulton, had leaned over and whispered, "Nice try," with the kindness of someone who genuinely meant it as comfort. Emily had nodded and said nothing. Now she sat in the trailer listening to Rhodes's voice on the radio, and she was doing the math again. She had been doing it since the mission launched. 6 hours and 40 minutes, 12 men, 3 heavy weapons emplacements at minimum. She could identify at least that many from the acoustic pattern of the contact reports. She pulled up the terrain data on her screen and overlaid the radio call coordinates. The northern ridge was exactly where she had calculated it would be. Approximately 900 meters from her current position, 600 of that accessible by vehicle trail, 300 vertical on foot, in the dark, over rock that the planning documents described as Class 4 technical terrain. Her rifle was in the case under her bunk. Emily sat very still for a moment. She thought about the major's smile. She thought about the word acceptable written in the margin of a casualty estimate by a man in clean clothes who would go home to a bed tonight. She thought about 12 men in a canyon who had 6 hours and 40 minutes to survive, something that the mathematics said they could not survive. She stood up. Fulton looked at her from the other side of the trailer. "Carter, where are you going?" "I need to check the relay antenna, getting some signal degradation on the primary frequency." Fulton looked at his own screen. "Looks clean to me." "Secondary screen, it's intermittent." She was already reaching under the console for her field pack. "You want me to log it?" "I'll handle it," she said. "Keep monitoring the primary traffic." She went out the door before he could say anything else. The night air hit her like a cold hand. She moved to her quarters trailer in 40 seconds, retrieved her rifle case, and kept moving. She did not let herself think about what would happen if this went wrong. She did not let herself think about the after, the reports, the reprimands, the chain of command, consequences, for a corporal who abandoned her post to climb a mountain that a major had explicitly told her was not viable. She thought about the ridge. She thought about the math. She started moving north. The first 300 meters were fast. She used the vehicle trail, staying off the packed center, where her boots would leave the clearest prints, moving in the loose gravel at the edge. She kept her head down and her pace controlled. She had learned through years of hunting terrain that punished impatience, that speed in the dark was not about moving fast. It was about moving precisely. Every step placed, every shift of weight deliberate. At the base of the rock face, she stopped and looked up. She could not see the top. She could see the first 40 or 50 meters, enough to identify the route she had calculated from the map, a diagonal traverse that used a natural ledge system to gain elevation without committing to a direct vertical line that would have left her completely exposed. She slung her rifle across her back and began to climb. The rock was cold, not the cold of temperature alone, the cold of something that had been sitting in darkness for a long time and had no interest in the warmth of living things. Her fingers found cracks and edges by feel more than sight, and she moved upward the way she had learned to move through everything in her life, methodically, without panic, trusting the work she had done before the moment arrived. Below her, she could hear the canyon. The machine guns had settled into intermittent bursts that meant the ambush force was managing ammunition. They were not afraid of running dry, which meant they were well supplied. That meant a resupply chain. That meant an organized operation that had been planned well in advance. She stopped on the ledge and pressed herself flat. On the radio, she had a single earpiece connected to the tactical frequency. She heard Rhodes again. "Operations, we have the man down. I say again, man down. Requesting expedited extraction. Bravo, actual, we copy. No change to timeline. 0300. Can you confirm your defensive perimeter is..." Rhodes cut the frequency. She heard him breathe for a second on the open channel. Just breathe. The sound of a man choosing what he was going to do with the thing that he felt, because feeling it was not an option available to him right now. "All elements," he said, "tighten the perimeter. Webb, I need that southern gun suppressed if you can manage it." "Working on it," Webb said. "Tran is maneuvering. It's going to take time." "We have time," Rhodes had said in the tone of a man lying helpfully. Emily kept climbing. The ledge system ended at roughly 500 meters of elevation. Above that, the rock changed character, steeper, less forgiving, the kind of terrain where a missed hold meant a fall that would not stop. She had expected this. The map had shown it. She had calculated a route that cut diagonally across the face to reach a secondary chimney formation, a narrow vertical crack in the rock that would let her bridge her way to the top. She found the chimney and pressed her back against one wall, her feet against the other, and began moving upward in the darkness with nothing beneath her but air and stone. Her arms were burning by the time she cleared the chimney and rolled onto the flat ground at the ridge crest. She lay on her back for 10 seconds, chest heaving, staring at the sky. Then she got up. She assembled her rifle from its case in darkness by touch. She had done it so many times that the sequence lived in her hands rather than her memory. She checked the scope, checked the bolt, and checked the magazine. She had brought 4. She had also brought the wind meter she kept in her field pack because she always kept it, because she had learned that the universe rewarded people who prepared for possibilities that other people had decided were not worth preparing for. She crawled to the edge of the ridge. Below her, the canyon opened up like a map. She had been right. She had been completely, entirely mathematically right. She could see everything. The northern machine gun emplacement was dug into a natural hollow in the canyon wall. 2 operators, she could see the heat signatures of their body positions through the thermal scope. 2 sources of warmth crouched behind a weapon that had been killing the men below for nearly an hour. She could see the southern gun, elevated on a rock platform exactly as Webb had identified. 3 operators. She could see movement figures shifting between positions, carrying ammunition, relaying signals. She could see in the canyon below the scattered positions of the SEAL team. 12 men pressed against rocks and behind rubble, some of them not moving the way she would have expected. She counted. She breathed. She began to calculate. Wind at the ridge was coming from the northwest at approximately 11 kilometers per hour, but the canyon created its own pressure dynamics. She could see the tracer rounds drifting slightly south of their aim points, which told her the canyon floor wind was different. She would need to account for the transition zone. Distance to the northern gun, 430 meters. She adjusted her scope. She put her eye against it. She found the position. She breathed in slowly. She breathed out halfway. And then she stopped breathing entirely the way her father had taught her when she was 6 years old, kneeling in cold grass with a rifle that was almost too heavy for her, his voice patient and unhurried in her ear. "The shot happens in the space between heartbeats," he had told her. "You don't pull the trigger. You let the moment arrive." The moment arrived. The canyon shook with a sound that was different from everything that had come before, a single clean crack from above that had no echo because it needed none. The northern machine gun went silent. In the canyon below, Rhodes heard it. He pressed himself against his rock and stared north. "Did that gun just..." "It stopped," Webb said. There was something in his voice that Rhodes had never heard before from Marcus Webb, something that sounded impossibly like surprise. "The north gun stopped." "Mechanical," Kowalski said. "That wasn't mechanical," Webb said. "That was a shot." Rhodes keyed his radio. "All elements hold position. Something is happening on the north side of the canyon. I do not know what it is." He paused. Then he said the question that was already forming in his mind. Is anyone in an overwatch position, any element, report? Silence. Then from a frequency she had almost not bothered to carry because no one had ever expected her to need it, Emily. Carter pressed her transmit button. Captain Rhodes, she said. Her voice was level. She was already adjusting for the southern gun, measuring the angle difference, accounting for the elevation change. This is Corporal Carter. I am in overwatch position on the northern ridge. I have eyes on multiple enemy positions. Request permission to continue engaging. The silence on the radio lasted 3 seconds. Then Rhodes said slowly, the way a man says something he cannot entirely believe he is saying. Corporal Carter, you have my permission. What is your ammunition status? 3.5 magazines, she said. It'll be enough. She found the southern gun through her scope. She adjusted for the elevation differential. She measured the distance, 490 meters. She accounted for the wind. She let the moment arrive. The second shot crossed the canyon. Below her in the dark, 12 men waited. And the ridge that everyone had said was impossible began shot by shot to change the shape of everything. The second shot hadn't even stopped echoing before Rhodes was back on the radio. Carter, confirm your position. You said northern ridge. Confirmed, she said. Her voice had the quality of someone doing 2 things at once, answering him while simultaneously never taking her eye from the scope. I'm on the crest. I have full sight lines to the canyon floor. The southern gun is down. I have at least 6 additional positions I can identify from up here. Rhodes looked at Webb. Webb looked back at him with an expression that said what neither of them was going to say out loud, which was that a corporal from the communications trailer had just done in 2 shots what 12 SEALs in an hour of coordinated maneuvering had not been able to accomplish. How did you get up there? Rhodes said. Climbed, she said, in the dark. Yes, sir. Rhodes pressed his back against the rock. Another burst of fire cut across the canyon, but it was disorganized. Now the enemy knew something had changed and they didn't know what, which meant they were spraying instead of aiming, which meant they were scared, which was the first genuinely useful development of the last 60 minutes. Dominguez, Rhodes called. Southside, what's your status? Dominguez's voice came back rough and tight. We have 2 wounded. Harmon took shrapnel in the leg. He's mobile, but slow. Nguyen is down, chest wound. He's breathing. We've got pressure on it. Rhodes closed his eyes for 1 second. 1 second was all he allowed himself. Then he opened them. Can you move Nguyen to the eastern wall? Negative, not without exposing the carry team to the north gun. The north gun is down, Rhodes said. A pause. Say again. The north gun is down. We have a sniper on the northern ridge providing overwatch. Move Nguyen to the eastern wall and get him stable. We are holding this position until 0300. Another pause, longer this time. Then Dominguez said very quietly, who is on the ridge? Corporal Carter, Rhodes had said. The silence that followed had a specific shape to it. Rhodes had been in enough combat situations to know what silence meant in each context. This silence meant that Dominguez, who had been in the same planning briefing where Major Crest had smiled at the young woman in the back row, was now doing a rapid and painful recalculation of several things he had previously believed to be true. Copy that, Dominguez said. Moving Nguyen now. On the ridge, Emily was not listening to the radio traffic anymore. She had narrowed her world to the scope, the wind, and the math. The enemy force was reorganizing. She could see it happening in real time, the way figures that had been moving with purpose and coordination were now moving with urgency and confusion. When you removed a machine gun emplacement from a pre-planned ambush, you did not just eliminate the firepower. You eliminated the geometry. The entire ambush had been designed around interlocking fire zones, which meant every element of it depended on every other element. Pull one thread, and the whole pattern shifted. She identified a figure moving between 2 positions. She could tell from the body language that this was someone giving instructions rather than carrying ammunition. Command personnel moved differently than support personnel. She had studied this not because anyone had asked her to, but because she could not look at a tactical situation without automatically cataloging everything in it. She tracked him for 4 seconds. She let the moment arrive. The third shot crossed the canyon. The movement between the 2 positions stopped. Below her, Webb heard it. He had his head up, now doing something that would have gotten him killed 3 minutes ago, actually looking at the canyon rather than pressing himself into the rock and hoping the rock was enough. She's picking them apart, he said. He said it the way a man says something that has arrived at him faster than his ability to fully process it. How many shots? Rhodes said. 3, Webb said. 3 shots, 2 gun emplacements, and a command element in less than 4 minutes. Rhodes was doing the math that any commander does automatically. What was the effect on the enemy's capacity? What was the effect on his team's position? What could he do now that he couldn't do 2 minutes ago? The answer to the last question was more than he could have hoped. Webb, take Kowalski and Tran. Northern side of the canyon, there's a supply line. Carter, can you confirm a supply element on the north approach? Confirmed, she said immediately. 3 personnel, 1 vehicle stationary, approximately 300 meters north of your position. They haven't moved since I reached the ridge. They're the resupply chain. You've been watching them since you got up there. I've been watching everything since I got up there, she said. Captain, you have a command element set up approximately 500 meters northeast of your position, elevated behind a rock formation. I count 4 personnel. One of them has been on a radio continuously since I took the north gun down. They're calling for support. Rhodes felt the cold settle deeper into his chest, but it was a different kind of cold now. Not the cold of a man staring at odds he cannot beat, the cold of a man who has just been handed information that changes the calculation entirely. They're calling for reinforcements, he said. Yes, sir, which means we have a window. However long it takes their support to arrive, that's our window. How long do you estimate? I don't know this area well enough to give you a solid number, she said. But the way he's been transmitting, he's not calm. Calm people don't transmit the way he's transmitting. He expected this to be over by now. Rhodes looked at Webb, who had returned to the cover of the boulder and was already organizing Kowalski and Tran for the northern movement. Webb caught his eye and held up 5 fingers, his estimate of minutes before they could move. Carter, Rhodes said, if I move elements to neutralize that command position, can you cover their approach? Yes, sir. If the supply element moves, I'll stop them. If they call another RPG position. She didn't answer for a second. In that second, Rhodes understood that she was not hesitating out of doubt. She was being precise. If I can see it, she said, I can stop it. There's a section of the canyon's western wall that I don't have a direct line on, about 80 meters of dead ground. If they use that, I'll give you as much warning as I can, but I can't guarantee a shot. That's an honest answer, Rhodes said. I try not to make promises I can't calculate, she said. Webb touched Rhodes on the shoulder. We're ready. Rhodes keyed the full team frequency. All elements, we are transitioning from defensive to active. Webb's element is moving on the northern approach. Dominguez hold the eastern position and keep Nguyen stable. Carter is providing overwatch from the ridge. Move on my mark. He paused. Carter, we're moving in 30 seconds. Watch Webb's element. And I have them, she said immediately. Mark. Webb moved. Kowalski moved. Tran moved. Emily tracked them through the scope for exactly 2 seconds to confirm their direction. Then she was already scanning ahead of their movement path, looking for anything that might be moving toward them. Any position that might have a line on their route. She found one. A figure she had marked earlier as stationary had shifted. He was moving parallel to Webb's element 30 meters above them on the canyon wall. He had a rifle, not a machine gun, and the way he was moving told her he had seen something or been told something and was now trying to get into a position from which he could engage. Captain, there is a shooter moving on the canyon wall northeast quadrant. He will have a line on Webb's element in approximately 20 seconds. Can you engage? She was already measuring. 380 meters. The angle was steep. She would need to compensate for the downward trajectory, which she had calculated for before. But the exact figure depended on the precise elevation difference, which she was estimating from the map data she had memorized rather than from a direct measurement. She had one chance. If she waited too long, he would have cover again. If she shot too early and missed in this canyon with these acoustics, a miss was almost as informative to the enemy as a hit. She breathed out. She let the moment arrive. The shot went down and across the canyon at an angle that no one at the briefing would have believed was achievable from that position. Webb heard the crack from above him and instinctively looked up. He saw nothing. He kept moving. You're clear, Emily said in his earpiece. Keep going. 40 meters, there's a natural channel in the rock. Take it north. It'll shield you from the command element's sightline. Webb didn't ask how she knew about the channel. He found it 14 meters later and took it exactly as she described. Rhodes heard the exchange and felt something happen in his chest that he did not have a word for in the middle of a firefight and would not find the words for until much later. What he felt he would eventually realize was the specific sensation of watching someone be exactly who they were, of seeing ability meet moment in a way that was so clean and complete that it looked almost like something other than human effort. He pushed the feeling aside and kept working. Dominguez status. Nguyen is stable. Harmon is holding. We're holding the eastern wall. Good. The moment Webb neutralizes the northern supply element, we are going to push north toward the command position. Carter will cover the approach. Copy, Dominguez said. Then after a half-second, Rhodes. Yeah, she's something. Rhodes almost said something clinical about operational effectiveness. Instead, he said simply, yeah, she is. On the ridge, Emily had moved 12 meters east along the crest to improve her angle on the command element. The move had taken her 30 seconds. She had done it in a controlled crawl, keeping her profile below the ridgeline because she had not survived this long by being careless about her own silhouette. She settled back into position and found the command element through her scope. 4 personnel. One was definitely the commander. He was the one talking, the one gesturing, the one standing up when he should have been crouching. That was a specific kind of ego, the kind that believed its own authority conferred a kind of protection that it did not in fact confer. She did not engage yet. Rhodes had not cleared her to engage the command element, and she had not asked. She was watching cataloging, measuring. The commander was using a satellite phone in addition to the radio. Now that meant he had reached someone and was trying to communicate something too sensitive or too complex for the standard frequency. That was a signal worth noting. She keyed her radio. Captain, the command element has transitioned to satellite comms. They've made contact with someone outside this immediate area. Rhodes came back immediately. You're sure it's satellite? The antenna profile and the duration of the transmission. They're not talking to someone in this canyon. They're talking to someone who needs to know what's happening here. Rhodes was quiet for 3 seconds. Carter, what is your assessment of the incoming support timeline? She thought about it. Not about what she wanted the answer to be, about what the evidence actually indicated. The canyon geography, the response time already elapsed since her first shot, the nature of satellite communications, and what it meant about the command structure of whoever had set this ambush up. 30 to 45 minutes, she said. Maybe less if they have something pre-positioned. Webb, Rhodes said instantly. Accelerate. Already moving, Webb said. The next 7 minutes were the kind of minutes that combat veterans spend the rest of their lives trying to explain to people who weren't there the way time compresses and expands simultaneously, the way everything becomes very loud and very clear, at the same time the way the body performs functions that the conscious mind would never be able to plan if it tried. Webb's element hit the supply position with the violence and efficiency of men who had trained for exactly this for years. The 3 personnel at the vehicle did not have time to respond in any way that mattered. It was over in 90 seconds. Northern supply element neutralized, Webb reported. We have the vehicle. I'm counting the munitions. Rhodes, they had enough here for 6 more hours of sustained contact. This wasn't a raid. This was a siege. Rhodes felt the word land in his chest. Siege, not an ambush of opportunity. A calculated, pre-planned, pre-supplied siege designed to hold a SEAL team in place until something else happened. Carter, he said, the satellite call. They were not calling for support troops. She had already been thinking the same thing. No, she said, they were reporting status to someone who wanted to know that the team was contained, which means someone knew we were coming. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of the implication neither of them needed to say out loud, the implication that had a name and an address in a pressed civilian shirt in a folder full of casualty estimates with the word acceptable in the margin. Hold that thought, Rhodes said. His voice had gone very flat and very professional, which was what happened to his voice when he was most angry. We deal with what's in front of us. We finish this, then we deal with everything else. Understood, Emily said. She tracked the command element. The commander had ended his satellite call and was now speaking rapidly to the 3 people around him. She could not hear the words, but she could read the body language, the pointing, the sharp gestures, the way the 3 subordinates were suddenly moving with purpose rather than waiting. They're repositioning, she said. Command element is breaking into smaller groups. They're going to try to flank Webb's position. Direction. Two going east. One staying with the commander moving to a secondary position. He's heading toward my dead ground area. Can you stop him before he reaches it? She measured the distance and angle as he moved. He was already committed to a route that was taking him partially behind a rock formation. She had seconds, not minutes. Barely, she said. She adjusted. The mathematics changed faster than she could formally calculate them, which meant she was operating on something deeper than calculation. The intuition built from 10,000 hours of doing exactly this, the way a musician's hands know the chord before the mind names it. She fired. The figure going east. Not the commander. The commander was already behind a partial cover. She made the harder choice. The commander behind cover was still a threat she could track, but the flanking elements moving toward Webb were the immediate danger. East flanker is down, she said. Second east flanker has gone to ground. Captain, he's still moving. He's just moving carefully now. He knows I'm up here. They all know you're up here, Rhodes said. Carter, how is your ammunition? She checked. 1 full magazine and approximately 11 rounds in the current mag. Rhodes did not respond immediately, and in that pause, she understood what he was doing. He was calculating what she had spent against what might still be required, and the number was uncomfortable. I'll make every shot count, she said before he could say anything about conservation. I know you will, he said, and the way he said it, not as encouragement, not as pressure, but as simple acknowledgement of demonstrated fact, was the first time in Emily Carter's military career that a superior officer had spoken to her that way. She noticed it the way you notice something that should have been ordinary and wasn't. Webb's voice cut across the frequency. Rhodes, I have eyes on your command element. Secondary position, he's moved to a rock formation approximately 200 meters west of his original position. He has a clear line on your main group. Rhodes looked at the eastern wall where Dominguez was holding with the wounded. 200 meters was close. In the dark with a rifle from cover, that was a problem. Carter, the command element. New position, 200 meters west. Webb is calling it. Do you have a line? She was already moving back along the ridge crest, reversing the 12-meter shift she'd made 20 minutes ago. Every second she was moving was a second she wasn't shooting, and she felt the time pressure as a physical sensation. She settled back into her original position and swept the scope across the western side of the canyon. Found him. He was a good operator. He had chosen his position carefully, using the rock formation to cover 3 sides of his approach and keeping his profile low. From the canyon floor, he would have been nearly invisible. From the ridge, he had made one mistake. He had not considered that someone might be above him. Almost no one ever considered the ridge. I have him, she said. Clear to engage, Rhodes said. She measured the distance. 410 meters. The angle had improved with her repositioning. This shot would be cleaner than several she'd already made. She found the space between his cover and his position. There was a gap, small, maybe 18 inches of exposure, where he could see the canyon below and could therefore be seen from above. She waited. He shifted to use this gap to observe. It was what she had expected, because it was what anyone in his position would do. The same gap that gave him eyes on the canyon gave her eyes on him. The moment arrived. The shot crossed 410 meters of canyon in a time too small to measure. Rhodes heard the report and immediately keyed Dominguez. Eastern wall report. We're good, Dominguez said. What was that? That was Carter, Rhodes said. From somewhere in the darkness, Webb's voice came across the frequency with something in it that was not quite a laugh and not quite something else. I'm starting to think maybe someone should have listened to her in the briefing. Rhodes almost said something. He stopped himself because there was a time for that conversation, and that time was not while they were still in the canyon. All elements prepare to move. We are pushing north to consolidate. Dominguez can harm and walk on his own. He says yes. I believe him about 60%. That'll do. Carter, we are going to begin a consolidated push north toward the original objective. What is the threat picture ahead of us? She swept the scope north. She had been doing this continuously, never letting any sector go unwatched for more than 30 seconds, cycling through the full field of view with the methodical discipline of someone who understood that the shot she didn't take in time was the one that cost lives. 3 remaining fighters northeast side in fixed positions. They haven't moved in several minutes. I think they're waiting for instructions that are not coming from the command element anymore. She paused. There's something else. Say it. The hostage structure. I've been watching it. There's been movement inside. I can see light from a narrow opening on the north face. Someone is awake in there. If the remaining fighters receive new orders to move on the structure, they could use the hostages, Rhodes said. Yes, sir. The silence lasted exactly 1 second. Then we move now, Rhodes has said. Carter, can you hold the 3 northeast positions while we close the distance? Yes, but Captain, after I do, I'm going to be very close to empty. Then we move fast, Rhodes has said, and we don't waste what you have. I never waste anything, she said. Webb was already on the move. Dominguez was already organizing the wounded. Rhodes had his team consolidated and moving in under 90 seconds, and as they moved through the canyon that had been a death trap 45 minutes ago, he was aware of something that he had felt in combat before, but rarely this cleanly, the sensation of the battle having a direction now. Not just resistance, direction. He knew where they were going, he knew what they were doing, he knew with a certainty he had not had since the helicopters left that this was something they were going to get out of. From the ridge above them, Emily tracked their movement and held the 3 northeast positions with the weight of her attention, alone not firing, conserving, watching. The 3 fighters had not moved. She kept them in her scope like a hand on a door that she would push shut the moment it began to open. Her right hand was steady on the rifle. Her breathing was controlled. She had 11 rounds in the current magazine and 1 full magazine after that. She had been calculating continuously what 11 rounds plus 30 rounds needed to accomplish against what remained. The math was tight. The math had always been tight for every goal she had ever tried to reach in an institution that kept telling her to aim lower. She had never found the math to be a reason to stop. Below her, Rhodes was closing on the objective, closing on the people who needed to be gotten out, closing on the end of a night that had been designed by someone with clean clothes and a comfortable chair and a casualty estimate with a convenient word written in the margin to end very differently. Emily Carter kept her eye on the scope. She kept the door closed. And in the northeast, the 3 remaining fighters waited for orders from a command element that would never transmit again. Unaware that the ridge above them, the ridge that everyone had decided was not worth considering, was occupied by a woman who had spent her entire career being not worth considering, and who had decided somewhere on the climb up that she was done with that particular narrative. 2/2 Rhodes moved north, and he did not look back. That was a discipline he had learned early. Not the discipline of not caring, but the discipline of understanding that looking back in the middle of a fight was how you stopped seeing what was ahead of you. He kept his eyes forward and his mind on the objective, and he trusted the people behind him to do the same. Webb was on his left. Dominguez was managing the 2 wounded on the eastern wall approach, Harmon moving under his own power with one hand against the rock face for balance, Nguyen being carried in a 2-man assist by Kowalski and Tron. The rest of the team moved in a compressed formation that was nothing like the textbook diamond they'd used on the approach. This was something rawer and more functional, shaped by an hour of combat rather than 3 weeks of planning. The 3 northeast fighters had not moved. Emily had told him they were waiting for orders that weren't coming, and he was betting his team's lives on her. Read of the situation and the fact that he was willing to do that, willing to bet on her right after less than an hour of working with her, told him something about what the last hour had demonstrated. Carter, he said, keeping his voice low, we are 200 meters south of the objective. Give me a current picture. Her response came without delay, which he had come to expect. She did not pause to think about whether she had the information. She had the information because she had not stopped watching for a single moment since she settled onto that ridge. 3 northeast fighters still fixed. The 2 I can see clearly have not changed position in 11 minutes. The 3rd went partially behind cover 8 minutes ago, and I have not had a clear visual since. But his last direction of movement was away from your approach route. A pause of exactly 2 seconds, her calibrating pause, he had learned to recognize it. There is activity inside the hostage structure. The light I mentioned earlier has moved. It's no longer stationary. Someone is moving inside. How many someone? I can't determine number from the light pattern alone, but the movement is agitated. It's not the movement of people sleeping. Rhodes processed that. Agitated movement inside the hostage structure at this hour after an hour of gunfire in the canyon, that could mean the hostages were trying to do something themselves, which was either very useful or very dangerous, depending on what they were trying to do and what the remaining fighters did in response to it. We accelerate, he told Webb. Webb didn't argue. Webb never argued when the math pointed one direction clearly. They covered the next 100 meters in a pace that pushed the limits of what the terrain and the wounded would allow. Harmon was moving better than 60%. He was moving like a man who had decided that pain was a secondary variable, and the primary variable was not falling behind. Kowalski and Tron had Nguyen in a rhythm which helped. Nguyen was conscious, which also helped. He had told them 3 times to put him down and let him crawl, and they had ignored him all 3 times, which was the right decision and which he would acknowledge later. At 100 meters south of the objective, Emily spoke again. "Captain, the 3rd Northeast fighter, I have him. Where he moved, he's not where I last tracked him. He's repositioned to a point that gives him a line on the north face of the hostage structure." Another calibrating pause. "And he has something in his hands that is not a rifle." Rhodes stopped moving. Behind him, the team stopped with him, the stop rippling back through the formation with the wordless coordination of people who had trained together long enough to move as a single organism. "An incendiary," Rhodes said. It was not a question. "I believe so. He's not engaging your team. He's facing the structure." The thought arrived fully formed and terrible. They were not going to use the hostages as shields. They were going to eliminate them entirely. A contained operation that left no witnesses and no recoverable intelligence. That was a different kind of mission than the one Rhodes had been briefed about, and it told him something significant about who had planned this and what they had been trying to accomplish. "Carter, can you take him? Distance is 350 meters. The angle is difficult. He's in a partial depression, and I'm shooting downward into it. I have a shot, but the margin is narrow." "How narrow?" "Narrow enough that I want you to know before I take it." He heard something in that, not doubt, not hesitation. Honesty, the specific honesty of a shooter telling a commander the real parameters of a shot rather than the comfortable parameters. "Take it," Rhodes said. "We close the distance simultaneously." "Moving to intercept the moment you fire," Webb said, already reading the situation without being told. "On your shot, Carter," Rhodes said. She had already settled into position. The depression the fighter was using was a natural bowl in the rock, designed by geology rather than tactics, but it served the same purpose. It cut off ground-level sight lines while leaving the target free to engage anything at his own elevation or above. What it did not account for was someone shooting from significantly higher and at a steep angle, because that required a position that the planning documents had called inaccessible, and a shooter that the briefing officer had dismissed with a smile. Emily measured the gap between the fighter's cover and his exposure. She measured the angle depression. She accounted for the fact that a steep downward shot required a higher aim point to compensate for the trajectory arc, and that the compensation factor changed with the angle in a way that was counterintuitive until you had done enough of it to have it in your bones. She had done enough of it. She had more of it in her bones than anyone in the canyon below her knew. She exhaled. The moment arrived. The shot went down and into the depression at an angle that should not have been achievable from a position that should not have existed. The incendiary device did not ignite. Rhodes heard the shot and was already running. Webb was already running. The team moved north at a pace that abandoned any pretense of tactical caution because the tactical situation had shifted from careful approach to foot race, and the only variable that mattered now was time. "2 Northeast fighters are reacting," Emily said, and her voice was still level, which told him that her eye was still in the scope and her hand was still on the rifle. "They're moving toward your position. Can you hold them?" "One of them," she said. "I have 11 rounds left." 11 rounds against 2 moving targets while simultaneously covering a team in a foot race and managing the dead ground on the western wall. Rhodes heard the number and did not say what he thought about it, because what he thought about it was not useful. "Hold the closer one," he said. "We deal with the second." "Understood." A pause. "Closer one is down. Second fighter has taken cover. He's behind the northern rock cluster, approximately 60 meters northeast of the structure. He's not moving." 60 meters northeast of the structure. That put him between Rhodes's team and the objective in cover with a rifle waiting. "Dominguez," Rhodes said. "Already working it," Dominguez said. He had handed off Harmon to another team member and was moving east trying to get an angle on the rock cluster that would not require walking through the fighter's field of fire. "Carter, can you see the fighter in the northern rock cluster?" "Partial view," she said. "He's using the cluster well. I have maybe 30% of his exposure when he shifts to observe. It's a shot I can take, but I'll likely need 2 rounds to make it work. Save them, Rhodes said. Dominguez has an angle. Copy. I'm watching the western wall. Dominguez moved like a man who had been doing this for 2 decades because he had been. He went east and then north in a route that kept the rock cluster between him and the fighter, which meant the fighter never had a clean look at him, which meant by the time Dominguez was in position, the fighter had no idea the geometry had changed. It was over in seconds. Clear, Dominguez said. Rhodes reached the structure's south face with Webb, Kowalski, Tran, and 3 other team members. He pressed against the wall and listened. Inside, there was movement. Quick frightened the movement of people who had heard everything and understood none of it clearly. He found the door. It was barred from outside, which told him everything about the nature of this operation. Whatever had been planned for the hostages, it had not included the option of them leaving on their own. He lifted the bar and pulled the door open. The first thing that came out was not a person, but a sound, the compressed, ragged exhale of multiple people who had been holding their breath in the dark for a very long time. There were 7 hostages, 4 men, 3 women. Civilian contractors, as the briefing had stated, though looking at them now, Rhodes had the thought he often had in these moments, that the word civilian covered an enormous range of human experience, and none of it prepared a person for being in a stone room in a canyon while a gunfight happened outside. United States Navy, Rhodes said, keeping his voice level and clear. You are safe. We are extracting you now. Can anyone not walk? One of the women raised her hand, not dramatically, the controlled raise of someone conserving energy. My ankle, I can move but slowly. We've got you, he said. He turned to Webb. Get them organized. We move in 2 minutes. Webb was already on it. Rhodes stepped back outside and keyed his radio. Carter, objective secure, 7 hostages, 1 limited mobility. What is your current threat picture? Clear at this moment, she said. The canyon has been quiet for 4 minutes. Nothing moving on any approach I can see. A pause. But Captain, the satellite call from the command element. Whoever they were reporting to knows the operation failed. That doesn't mean they accept it as finished. Agreed, Aisha Ambada. How far out could a response force be? I've been calculating since you asked me the first time. I think we have between 20 and 40 minutes from now before anything organized arrives. The geometry of the road network feeding this area limits approach speeds. Then we don't use 40 minutes, we use 20. I would recommend it, she said. He keyed operations. Operations, this is Bravo Actual. Objective secured. 7 hostages in hand. We need extraction at the original LZ priority immediate. Do you copy? The same calm voice. The same coffee and fluorescent lighting. Bravo Actual, we copy objective secured. Expedited extraction is being arranged. Estimated arrival at LZ, 40 minutes. Rhodes looked at his watch. He did the math. He looked at Webb, who had the hostages organized and moving. Tell them 30 minutes, he said into the radio. We will be at the LZ in 30 minutes. If the birds aren't there, we wait, but we will be there. He didn't wait for the response. Carter, he said, we are moving to the LZ. I need you to maintain overwatch until we reach the canyon exit. What is your descent time? For the first time in the entire operation, there was a pause before she answered. That was not a calibrating pause. It was a different kind of pause. The pause of someone doing a calculation they had not previously allowed themselves to do. The climb took me approximately 38 minutes in the dark, she said. The descent on the same route will be faster, but the descent is actually more technically difficult in some sections. So you're behind us, he said. Yes, sir. You reach the LZ before I do. He heard what was underneath that, not complaint, not fear, simply the statement of a logistical reality she had accepted before she ever started climbing. She had climbed that ridge knowing she could not come down fast enough to leave with the main group, and she had climbed it anyway. Carter, when we reach the LZ and the birds arrive, we hold for you. I'm not leaving that canyon without you. Another pause. Shorter. Captain, the mission priority. Is what I say it is, he said. We hold for you. She did not argue further. The movement to the LZ was the longest 22 minutes of the operation, and it was long not because of the distance or the terrain, but because of what they were carrying. 7 people who were not trained for this pace, one of them with an injured ankle, plus 2 wounded team members, plus everything they had taken from the supply vehicle. Rhodes set the pace by reading the slowest member of the group and pulling everyone slightly faster than that person's comfort allowed, which was the only way to make progress without losing someone. Harmon was helping carry Nguyen, a man with a shrapnel wound in his leg, carrying a man with a chest wound through a canyon in the dark. Rhodes watched them for a moment as he passed and thought about the word acceptable in the margin of a casualty estimate and felt something he would need to deal with later and was not going to deal with now. On the ridge above them, Emily Carter was moving. Not down, not yet. She was tracking their movement from the ridge, keeping her scope on the approaches, watching for the things she had warned Rhodes about. She would start her descent when they reached the midpoint of the canyon, close enough to the exit that the approach vectors for any response force would be funneling into ground. She could see less of far enough that her continued overwatch still had value. She counted her rounds, 8 in the current magazine, 1 full magazine after that. She had used 23 rounds. She had taken down 2 machine gun emplacements, a command element, 2 flanking fighters, 1 advanced shooter, the incendiary carrier, and 2 Northeast fighters. 8 confirmed engagements, resulting in 12 personnel no longer active. She ran the number again because she didn't trust herself not to miscount when she was tired. Same answer. She had 1 round remaining in the current mag beyond the 8 she was counting. She had miscounted under pressure, once corrected twice. She settled on 8 current plus 30 in reserve as her working number. Below her, Rhodes's group was approaching the canyon midpoint. She began to move toward the descent route. Then the radio crackled. It was not Rhodes. It was not Webb. It was not any voice she recognized. It was Fulton. Carter. His voice was wrong tight in a way that Fulton, who was one of the more unflappable people she had worked with, was not typically tight. Carter, are you on this frequency? She pressed transmit. I'm here. Where are you? And then before she could answer, I know where you are. I figured it out 20 minutes ago. Carter, there is a vehicle approaching the staging area from the north. It arrived 8 minutes ago. 2 personnel exited, went straight to Major Crest's command trailer. They were inside for 6 minutes. They just left. She felt something change in her chest, not fear exactly. Closer to the sensation of a lock clicking open on something she had not wanted to look at directly. What kind of vehicle? She said. Not military, Fulton said. Civilian registration. The driver stayed with the vehicle. The 2 who went in at Carter, I've been in this unit long enough to know the difference between people who are here for the mission and people who are here for something else. These were people here for something else. She kept moving toward the descent route, but slower now, processing. Fulton, did you log the vehicle? I tried. My access to the vehicle registry system was declined. I've never had a declined access on a vehicle registry in 3 years of doing this job. She stopped moving entirely. Declined access on a vehicle registry at a military staging area in the middle of an active operation for a civilian vehicle that had come directly to the commanding officer's trailer and left 6 minutes later. She ran the logic of that forward and did not like where it arrived. Fulton, listen to me. Do not log anything. Do not put anything in writing anywhere. Do you understand, Carter? Do you understand? A pause. Yeah, I understand. Stay at your station. Monitor the primary frequency. If you hear anything about the extraction timeline or the LZ coordinates changing, you call me immediately on this channel. What's happening? He said. She thought about how to answer that and decided the honest answer was the only one that would keep him appropriately careful. I don't know exactly, she said, but I think the problem with tonight's mission is not entirely in this canyon. She clicked off the channel and switched back to the tactical frequency. Rhodes was calling her. Carter, we are at the canyon midpoint. What is your position? Beginning descent now, she said. And then, because she had decided that there was no version of the situation where keeping the information to herself served anyone better than sharing it, Captain, I need to tell you something when we reach the LZ. Something that isn't about the canyon. A pause. She could hear the quality of his attention change even across the radio. Understood, he said. We'll talk at the LZ. She found the chimney in the dark by memory and Field pressed her back against one wall and her feet against the other and began to move down. The descent was exactly as she had told him, technically harder in sections. The upward pressure dynamic of the chimney that had helped her ascend now worked against her on the way down, and twice she had moments where a hand moved and did not find the hold she expected, and she had to control the correction with her legs while her fingers scrambled for purchase in the cold rock. She did not fall. She did not allow herself to think about falling as an option because the option was not useful to consider, and she had enough to consider. At the bottom of the chimney, she transitioned to the ledge traverse, and the ledge traverse was faster going down than it had been going up because gravity was no longer the primary problem. Balance was the primary problem, and balance was something. She had always had the same quality that made her a shooter. The ability to be completely still inside a body that was in motion. She cleared the ledge system with 11 minutes elapsed from the moment she started down. She hit the rock base and moved immediately south away from the canyon entrance toward the vehicle trail that would take her to the LZ. On the tactical frequency, Rhodes said, "Carter, we are at the LZ. Extraction birds are 6 minutes out." "I am 4 minutes from the LZ," she said. "We hold," he said. She ran. Not the careful, precise movement of the climb she ran, because the ground was flat enough to run, and the time math required it, and she had been precise and careful for the last 2 hours. And right now, the most useful thing she could be was fast. She came out of the vehicle trail onto the LZ with 90 seconds to spare before she heard the helicopters. Rhodes was standing at the edge of the LZ. He saw her coming and he did not say anything for a moment. Just watched her come in, rifle on her backpack, on her shoulders, moving at a pace that said more about the last 2 hours than any debrief would. She reached him and stopped. They looked at each other. She was breathing hard from the run. He was not breathing any differently than normal, which meant he had been more frightened in the last 2 hours than he was allowing his body to show, which was a thing she recognized because she did the same thing. "You wanted to tell me something," he said. "There was a civilian vehicle at the staging area," she said. "2 personnel visited Major Crest's trailer during the operation. My contact says the vehicle registry access was blocked when he tried to log it." Rhodes looked at her for a long moment. The helicopter sound was growing. "Garrett," he said, not a question. "I don't know the name," she said, "but whoever designed this operation knew we were coming. And whoever they reported to on the satellite call, they were reporting to the same chain." Rhodes's face did something complicated. She watched it happen, the anger moving through him in a wave that he controlled before it reached the surface, the way a very disciplined person controls a thing that would destroy them if they let it out in the wrong place at the wrong time. "Okay," he said. It was the same word Webb had said in the canyon, the word that meant, "I have accepted the reality of this, and I know what comes next." The helicopters came in over the ridge, and from somewhere above them, from the dark crest of the northern ridge that everyone had dismissed in a briefing room with pressed clothes and comfortable chairs, there was nothing now but silence and stone and the record of what had happened there, a record written not in plans or documents, but in the empty cases of 31 rounds, and the fact that 12 men and 7 hostages were standing on this LZ instead of in the ground. Rhodes looked at Emily Carter one more time before the helicopters touched down. "You're going to want to be careful what you put in writing about tonight," he said, "until I know who to trust with the full story." She met his eyes. "I've been careful about what I put in writing my entire career," she said. "Tonight is the first time it actually benefited anyone." The helicopters touched down, they climbed aboard, and the canyon fell away behind them into the dark, holding its silence the way canyons do, indifferently, completely, without any interest in the human reckoning that was just beginning. The helicopter ride back took 19 minutes and nobody spoke for most of it. That was not unusual after a combat extraction. The noise made conversation difficult, and the human body coming down from 2 hours of sustained adrenaline tended towards silence as a default. But this silence had a different quality than the exhaustion silence Rhodes had experienced after other operations. This one had weight to it, the kind of weight that comes not from what you survived, but from what you now know. Nguyen was stable. The medic on the bird had him on oxygen and was working his chest wound with the focused efficiency of someone who had done this too many times to be frightened by it, but not so many times that he had stopped caring. Harmon had his leg wrapped and was sitting with his back against the bulkhead and his eyes closed, not sleeping. His jaw was too tight for sleep, but resting inside himself in the way that experienced operators learn to do. Rhodes sat across from Emily Carter and watched her. She was not looking at him. She was looking at her hands, which were resting flat on her thighs. Her rifle was secured between her knees. There was rock dust on her jacket and a cut on her right palm that she had not mentioned, and that he had only noticed when the helicopter's interior light caught it at an angle. She had climbed 900 meters of technical terrain in the dark and hostile conditions, and she had not mentioned the cut on her palm. He thought about the briefing room. He thought about Major Crest's smile. He thought about the word acceptable and what it had been applied to, and he felt the anger move through him again in the wave he had learned to control, and he controlled it. Webb was watching him. Webb was always watching him when it mattered. "You okay?" Webb said directly into his ear to cut through the rotor noise. "No," Rhodes said. Webb nodded. He knew what that meant. It did not mean Rhodes was falling apart. It meant Rhodes was a person who told the truth to the people who needed to hear it, and Webb was one of those people, and the truth was that the night was not finished. Not really, not in any way that mattered beyond the immediate tactical situation. The hostages were clustered at the rear of the helicopter. One of the men Rhodes had learned his name was Pemberton. A project manager for an infrastructure contracting firm had not stopped shaking since they boarded. Not visibly. The way his hands moved, the way he breathed, told Rhodes the man was running on something that was going to run out the moment he felt safe, and feeling safe was going to hit him like a wall. One of the women, the one with the injured ankle, whose name was Sarah Yoon, had been watching Emily since the moment they boarded. Not staring, not intrusively, but the way a person watches something they are trying to understand. The way you watch someone who has just changed your understanding of what a person can do. The helicopter began its descent. Rhodes leaned toward Emily. "When we land," he said, "stay close to me. Do not go to debrief without me present. Do you understand?" She looked at him. "You think they're going to try to move fast on this?" "I think whoever arranged tonight's operation is going to want the narrative established before the people who were in the canyon have a chance to establish their own." "Yes." She held his gaze for a moment. "Major Crest will be there." "Yes." "He's going to say I abandoned my post." "He's going to say a lot of things," Rhodes said. "So am I." The helicopter touched down. The base was lit up in the way that military installations light up when something has gone wrong, and the people in charge are trying to make it look like they have. It handled too many people in too many places. Vehicles moving without obvious purpose, the controlled chaos of an institution managing a situation it had not expected to be managing. Rhodes was off the helicopter before the rotors had fully slowed. He had his hand on Emily's arm, not grabbing, not controlling, just present. She did not pull away. Webb took the team. Rhodes trusted him with that completely. Dominguez would see to Nguyen and Harmon. The hostages would go to the medical facility. The machine would process the operational outcome the way it always did, which meant documentation and debriefs and the slow bureaucratic digestion of an event that had been in reality instant and irreversible. Major Crest was waiting 30 meters from the landing pad. He had two other people with him, a Lieutenant Colonel Rhodes didn't recognize, and a civilian in a jacket that was slightly too clean and slightly too dry for a man who'd been on this base during a desert night operation. Rhodes looked at the civilian for exactly 1 second and filed everything he noticed about him. Crest's expression was the expression of a man who had spent the last 2 hours preparing something. It was not relief. It was not the expression a commander wore when he learned that the people he sent into a canyon had survived a night that should have killed them. It was the expression of a man who had an agenda and was deciding how to open it. "Captain Rhodes," Crest said. He did not look at Emily. "Major Rhodes said, I need you and your team in debrief immediately. There are some significant questions about the conduct of tonight's operation." "There are," Rhodes agreed. "I have some of those questions myself." Crest's eyes finally moved to Emily. They stayed there for a moment that was 1 second too long to be neutral. "Corporal Carter, you are relieved of your post pending a formal inquiry into unauthorized departure from your assigned station." Emily did not flinch. She met his eyes and said nothing, which was a more powerful response than anything she could have said. Rhodes stepped forward, not between them beside Emily. The distinction was deliberate. Major Corporal Carter's actions tonight preserved the lives of 12 operators and 7 civilian hostages. Any inquiry into her conduct will need to account for that operational record. "Her conduct will be evaluated in the proper context," Crest said. "Right now, I need you in debrief." "We're going," Rhodes said, "together." The civilian in the clean jacket had not spoken. He was watching Rhodes the way people watch things they are assessing rather than things they are seeing. Rhodes made a point of looking at him directly. The man did not look away. He had the particular quality of someone who was accustomed to not being looked at directly and was recalculating now that someone was doing it. The debrief room was set up with the table chairs, recording equipment, and a demographic that made Rhodes's jaw tighten. Crest and the lieutenant colonel on one side, two additional staff officers he vaguely recognized, and notably no one from the operation itself once except Rhodes. They had assumed apparently that he would come alone. He had not come alone. Webb walked in behind him, then Dominguez, then Emily. Crest looked at the room's sudden occupancy with the expression of a man who had set a table for 4 and found 12 people sitting down. "This debrief is for the mission commander," Crest said. "These are my team leaders and a key operator," Rhodes said, pulling out a chair. "They were in the canyon. They have direct operational knowledge of everything that occurred. I would like them present." "That's not standard procedure." "Tonight wasn't standard," Rhodes said. "We can do this the comfortable way or the accurate way. I'd recommend the accurate way." The lieutenant colonel, whose name tag said Hartwell, looked at Crest and then at Rhodes and made the calculation of a man who had not known what he was walking into when he agreed to be in this room. He said carefully, "Let's proceed." They sat. Crest opened a folder. He was going to control the narrative by controlling the questions, which was standard for a man in his position who needed the story to have a particular shape. Rhodes had seen it done before. He had also once or twice been the person doing it in situations where the shape of the story was something he needed to protect rather than something he needed to hide. He understood the mechanics. He also understood that the mechanics only worked when the other side didn't. "Captain Rhodes," Crest began, "walk me through the point of first contact." Rhodes walked him through it. He was precise, he was complete, and he was entirely truthful, which was the most dangerous thing a person could be in a room like this. Every detail, every timeline, every radio transmission. He gave Crest nothing to work with because the facts of the night were facts he wanted on the record, not buried in paraphrase. When he reached the moment Emily's first shot ended the northern gun emplacement, he did not soften it or contextualize it. He stated it as a fact because it was a fact. At approximately 22:47, he said, "The northern machine gun emplacement was neutralized by a single shot from Corporal Carter's position on the northern ridge. At that time, I had not confirmed she was in position, and her engagement was the first indication I had that the ridge was occupied." Crest looked up from his notes. "You did not authorize Corporal Carter's movement to the ridge?" "No," Rhodes said, "I did not. She identified the position as tactically critical, reached it under her own initiative, and engaged enemy positions with a level of precision and effect that significantly altered the outcome of the operation. That is a matter of operational record." "It's also a matter of record," Crest said, and here it was the thing he'd been building toward, that Corporal Carter abandoned her assigned post-accessed equipment outside her operational role and inserted herself into an active SEAL team engagement without authorization. These are serious disciplinary violations. The room was quiet. Emily, sitting 2 chairs to Rhodes's right, was looking at the table in front of her, not downward in defeat, with the stillness of someone waiting for the right moment. Webb spoke before Rhodes could. Webb, who almost never spoke in rooms like this because he generally considered them below his operational attention, said in the flat and authoritative voice of a man who had been in more combat situations than everyone else in the room combined, "With respect, Major, I'd like to understand what Corporal Carter's violation of procedure cost us against what her presence on that ridge gained us. Because from where I was standing in that canyon, it gained us everything." Crest looked at Webb with the expression of a man who had not expected resistance from that direction. "Senior Chief Webb, this isn't a debate about outcome. Protocol." "Respectfully," Dominguez said from the end of the table, and Dominguez's voice had a quality that came from his particular biography, from being a man who had started his career with nothing and earned every single thing he had through 2 decades of showing up. "In that canyon, Protocol had us dead by 0100. Corporal Carter had us alive by 0200. I think that difference is worth discussing." Crest turned to Hartwell with a look that requested intervention. Hartwell was looking at Dominguez with the expression of a man who was doing a rapid recalibration. "Let's hear Corporal Carter's account," Hartwell said. It was the first time anyone had suggested that. Rhodes noted it. Emily looked up. She looked at Hartwell, not at Crest. "At approximately 2200, she said, I was monitoring the tactical frequency from my assigned station when it became clear that the team was engaged in a prepared ambush that exceeded the resistance parameters described in the intelligence brief. I identified the northern ridge as a viable overwatch position. I had raised this possibility during mission planning, and it had been declined. She paused, not for effect, for precision. I assessed that the team would not survive until the scheduled extraction window without intervention. I made the decision to reach the overwatch position and provide fire support. Based on your own assessment, Crest said. Yes, sir. Without authorization. Yes, sir. She met his eyes now. The authorization I would have needed was not available in the time available. The people who could have given it were in the canyon being fired upon. I made a decision. I would make the same decision again. The room absorbed that. Crest opened his mouth. Rhodes got there first. Major, he said, and his voice had the quality it got when he was most controlled and therefore most dangerous. I'd like to ask a question that is not about Corporal Carter. Crest closed his mouth. The intelligence assessment for tonight's operation described light resistance, 12 to 15 personnel, no heavy weapons confirmed. What we found was a prepared ambush with multiple machine gun emplacements, RPG team's coordinated command structure, and a pre-positioned resupply chain sufficient for 6 hours of sustained contact. That is not a discrepancy in degree. That is a qualitatively different situation. Hartwell had straightened slightly in his chair. In addition, Rhodes continued, when I requested air support during the engagement, I was told no assets were available and the earliest support window was 0300. The timing of that restriction, the precise window during which we were engaged, is something I would like to understand. Asset availability is a command level, Crest began. I know what it is, Rhodes said. I'm asking who made the decision and when. The silence in the room changed texture. Crest said, that's outside the scope of this debrief. Then I'd like to know what the scope of this debrief is, Rhodes said. Because from where I sit, the scope appears to be establishing Corporal Carter's procedural violations, rather than examining how 12 operators ended up in a kill zone that our intelligence said didn't exist. Hartwell looked at Crest. It was a brief look, and it said something between them that Rhodes could not read entirely. But the edge of what he could read suggested that Hartwell had not known everything about tonight's operation before he walked into this room, and the things he was learning now were causing him to reconsider his position in relation to the man sitting beside him. Captain Rhodes, Hartwell said very carefully, are you suggesting that the intelligence failure tonight was not a failure of assessment? Rhodes held the lieutenant colonel's gaze. I'm suggesting that the characteristics of tonight's ambush, the preparation, the supply, the coordination, the timing of our support restrictions are consistent with someone having operational knowledge of our mission parameters in advance. The word someone sat in the center of the table like a stone dropped into water. Crest said, that is an extraordinary allegation. Yes, Rhodes said, it is. I'd like it on the record. Hartwell said, noted. Emily was watching Crest. She had been watching him throughout the exchange with the same quality of attention she brought to a scope, not emotional, not hostile, purely observational. She was cataloging his responses the way she cataloged wind patterns and position changes, building a picture from the data available. She had noticed 3 things. First, Crest had not asked a single question about the enemy force composition or the nature of the ambush, only about her departure from her post. Second, he had arrived at the landing pad with a civilian whose vehicle access records had been blocked. Third, every time Hartwell engaged with Rhodes's questions, Crest's breathing changed in a way that was small and controlled, and that most people in the room would not have noticed. She noticed it. She was deciding whether to speak when the door opened. The person who entered was not in uniform. He was a man of about 60, with the particular posture of someone who had spent decades in rooms where posture conveyed authority. He did not introduce himself. He looked at the room with the quick efficiency of someone cataloging exactly the same things Emily cataloged, and his eyes came to rest on Crest with an expression that was not warm. Colonel Hartwell, the man said, I need 5 minutes with this room, minus Major Crest. Crest stood up. Director, I don't think... Major, the man said, and the word had a quality that ended sentences 5 minutes. Crest left the room. He left the room with the specific quality of a man who knows that the story he has been managing has escaped the container he built for it. His footsteps in the corridor were the footsteps of someone walking from something rather than towards something. The man who had entered sat down in Crest's chair. He looked at Rhodes. He looked at Webb and Dominguez. He looked at Emily last, and he looked at her for a beat longer than he looked at the others. Captain Rhodes, he said, I want to hear everything that happened in that canyon tonight, from the beginning, all of it. Rhodes looked at the recording equipment on the table. The man followed his gaze and nodded once. It's running, the man said. I want it running. Rhodes started talking. He talked for 41 minutes. Webb added specifics. Dominguez added the view from the eastern wall. When they reached Emily's role, Rhodes gave her the floor with a look, and she told her part of it with the same precision she brought to everything. Timeline assessments, decision logic, round count, engagement, sequence. All of it. When she finished, the man was quiet for a moment. 31 rounds, he said. 12 confirmed engagements. Yes, sir, she said. From a position that the planning documents described as inaccessible. Yes, sir. He looked at her for a moment that was not uncomfortable, but was very direct. Why did you trust your assessment over the majors? She thought about it. She gave him the honest answer, which was the only answer she knew how to give. Because I had done the math, she said, and the math doesn't care about rank. Something moved in the man's expression. It was not quite a smile. It was the expression of someone who has heard exactly what they came to hear and is deciding what to do with it. The civilian vehicle at the staging area, he said, looking at no one in particular. We know about the vehicle. Rhodes leaned forward. Then you know, we've been building this for 8 months, the man said. Tonight accelerated some timelines. He paused. The intelligence failure was not a failure. The assessment of light resistance was a deliberate misrepresentation inserted into the intelligence package. The support restriction was not a coincidence of asset availability. Your team was meant to be in that canyon until a response force arrived. Another pause. You were not meant to come home. The silence that followed was the kind that had no useful response. Webb said very quietly, Nguyen. We'll survive, one of the man said. I confirmed that before I came in. Webb looked at the table. He nodded once. Rhodes said Garrett, the intelligence officer. In custody as of 2 hours ago, the man said. Major Crest's situation is more complex and is being managed at a level above this installation. I am here because I needed to hear directly from the people who were in the canyon specifically regarding the role of Corporal Carter before certain decisions are finalized. Emily said, what decisions? The man looked at her. The kind that involved deciding what to do with someone who should not exist but does, he said. Someone who was, according to every official document generated about tonight's operation, sitting in a communications trailer, monitoring frequencies. And who was, according to the operational record, now on tape in this room, single-handedly preventing a massacre from a ridge that everyone said couldn't be reached. She held his gaze. I was doing my job, she said. No, the man said. You were doing someone else's job better than they could do it because no one gave you your own. He stood. Captain Rhodes, I am going to need your team's full written accounts by 0600. Corporal Carter's accounts separately in detail. All of it, everything from the moment the helicopters left the staging area. Understood, Rhodes said. The man moved toward the door. Then he stopped with his hand on the frame and looked back at Emily one more time. Corporal, he said. Sir? The ridge. You climbed it alone in the dark, under fire, knowing you couldn't get down fast enough to leave with your team. He said it not as a question, but as a statement that was also somehow something else. Yes, sir, she said. Why? She thought about 12 men in a canyon. She thought about her father's voice telling her that the shot happened in the space between heartbeats. She thought about every briefing room she had ever sat in along the back wall, and every smile that had been used as a substitute for listening, and every time she had been told that the place she wanted to be was not viable. Because the math said someone had to, she said, and I was the one who knew the math. The man nodded. He left without another word. In the hallway outside, the sound of Crest's footsteps had been replaced by the sound of voices. The specific formal voices of people whose job it is to conclude things. Rhodes looked at Emily across the table. She looked back at him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. There was nothing that needed to be said that had not already been said in the canyon or on the helicopter or in this room in the last 41 minutes. The record existed now. It was on tape. It was in the accounts that would be written by 0600. It could not be unmade or managed or smiled away by a man with a pressed shirt and a folder full of convenient words. Webb leaned back in his chair and rubbed both hands over his face. I need coffee, he said. I need coffee, and I need to call my wife. and I need to never think about canyon acoustics again for the rest of my life." Dominguez laughed. It was the laugh that comes out of a person after the valve has been held closed for too long. Not quite humor, more like pressure finding a seam. Rhodes smiled. He had not smiled since before the helicopters left. Emily looked at Webb and then at Dominguez, and something in her face changed not much. And anyone who did not know what her face looked like the rest of the time would not have noticed. But the control released slightly the way a person releases something they have been holding with both hands when they finally believe they can set it down. She was still sitting at the table when Rhodes stood. "Carter," he said. She looked up. "Go get some sleep," he said. "Whatever happens next, and a lot is going to happen next, you need to be sharp for it." She nodded. She gathered her rifle. She stood. She walked to the door, and she walked the way she had walked into every room of her career, straight, unhurried, without apology for the space she occupied. She had always walked that way. It was simply that tonight, for the first time, the room she was walking out of had noticed. The hallway was busy with the institutional machinery of consequence, people with lanyards and folders, and the expressions of people who had been woken up for something important. Several of them glanced at her as she passed. She was aware of the glances in a way she was not usually aware of them. She was a corporal who had left a trailer in the dark, climbed a ridge that wasn't supposed to be climbable, and shot until the shooting was done. She was the same person she had been 12 hours ago. The world around her was the part that was different. And in a room behind her, on a recorder that was still running the record of the night, sat in the machine and waited for the people who needed to hear it. The people who would decide in the days to come what a single woman on a ridge had actually changed, and how much of it could be undone, and how much of it finally could not. Sleep did not come easily. Emily had been given a bunk in the temporary quarters attached to the medical facility, which was where they put people who needed to be close to oversight without being patients themselves. She lay on her back with her eyes open and listened to the bass settle around her, the machinery of an institution digesting a night that had not gone according to plan, the distant sound of vehicles, voices in hallways, the particular quality of a place that was supposed to be asleep but wasn't. She had written her account, all of it, 14 pages longhand, because she had learned years ago that handwriting left less room for later reinterpretation than typed text. Timeline assessments, an engagement log, radio communications. Everything she had observed about the civilian vehicle and the satellite call and Crest behavior in the debrief room. She had written it the way she shot, methodically, completely without ornamentation. The math of the night translated into words. She had slid the pages under the door of the room. The man without a name had been given at 5:47 in the morning, 13 minutes before the 0600 deadline. Then she had gone to her bunk and stared at the ceiling and waited for whatever was going to happen next to happen. What happened next arrived at 0730 in the form of a knock on the door. It was Fulton. He looked like a man who had not slept either, which was accurate, and like a man who had spent the sleepless hours doing something he was not sure was wise, which turned out also to be accurate. "I made copies," he said the moment she opened the door. He said it quickly, like a man releasing something he had been holding. "The vehicle log, the access denial records, the frequency timestamps from last night. I made copies before anyone could close the system. They're on an encrypted drive." He held up a drive that was roughly the size of his thumb. "I didn't know who to give it to, so I'm giving it to you." Emily looked at the drive. She looked at Fulton. He was a communications sergeant who had been in the Army for 11 years and who had, as far as she knew, never done anything more consequential than make sure radios worked. He had spent last night doing something that could end his career if it landed wrong. "Why?" she said. He met her eyes. "Because Nguyen has 3 kids," he said. "And because I've been watching you get pushed to the back of rooms for 2 years, and I always thought someone was going to do something about it, and nobody ever did." So, he held out the drive. She took it. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," he said. "Just make sure it goes somewhere it can't be made to disappear." She closed the drive in her fist and thought about the man without a name and the recorder that had been running and the 14 pages that were already under his door. "It will," she said. Fulton nodded. He started to leave, then turned back. "Carter, that was something. Last night. What you did." He said it without drama, the way people state facts they have verified personally. "I just wanted to say that out loud." She didn't know what to do with that. She had never known what to do with it because no one had said it to her often enough for her to have developed a response. She settled for the truth. I was terrified the whole time, she said. Yeah, Fulton said. That's what I mean. He left. She dress-pocketed the drive and went to find Rhodes. She found him in the medical bay sitting in a chair next to Nguyen's bed. Nguyen was sleeping actual sleep this time, not the tense unconscious of someone in active trauma, but the deep, motionless sleep of a body that had been pushed to its limits and was now reclaiming what it was owed. Rhodes was sitting in the chair, the way people sit when they have been sitting for a long time and are not planning to leave, not comfortable, not restless, just present. He looked up when she came in. She held up the drive without preamble. Fulton, she said. Vehicle logs, access, denial records, frequency, timestamps. Copies before system of lockdown. Rhodes looked at the drive for a moment. Then he stood slowly with the movement of a man whose body had registered the night, even if he had not allowed himself to. He took the drive and looked at it. The man from last night, he said. Do you have a way to reach him? No, she said, but I think he can reach us. He already has, Rhodes said. He contacted me at 06:15. Crest has been formally relieved. Garrett is in federal custody, not military federal. The operation is being transferred to an oversight body that is above this command structure. He paused. He also told me that the formal inquiry into your conduct has been suspended pending review. She absorbed that. Suspended, not dropped. For now, Rhodes said. He was honest about that. There are people in the chain who still want the procedural narrative because it's cleaner than the alternative. The alternative being that their intelligence assessment was deliberately corrupted and a corporal from the communications trailer had to fix it. Yes, Rhodes said, that alternative. She looked at Nguyen sleeping. She thought about the word acceptable in a margin. She thought about what the cleaner narrative cost and who paid for it. The drive goes to the oversight body, she said, not through this command. Agreed, Rhodes said. He pocketed it. I'll handle it. She nodded. She started to turn. Carter, he said. She stopped. He looked at her with the expression of a man choosing his words the way she chose her shots carefully with full understanding of the consequences. I've been in this uniform for 19 years, he said. I have served with people who were extraordinary. I have served with people who were brave in ways that most people never see and never get credit for. What you did last night, he stopped. He started again. What you did last night is the finest individual combat performance I have personally witnessed. That is going in my report, not as a footnote to the procedural discussion, as the primary finding. She held his gaze. She felt something move in her chest that she did not have a clean name for. It was not pride exactly, not relief exactly. It was closer to the sensation of something being set right that had been wrong for so long she had stopped expecting it to change. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, he said, echoing Fulton without knowing it. It's the record. I'm just making sure it's accurate. She almost smiled. You sound like me, she said. He did smile. I'll take that as a compliment, he said. Go eat something. You look like a person who hasn't eaten in 18 hours. She had not eaten in 18 hours. She had not noticed until he said it. She went to eat. The next 4 days were the institutional kind of difficult, not the acute, immediate difficulty of a canyon in the dark, but the grinding procedural difficulty of an institution trying to process something that did not fit its existing categories. There were formal interviews, written statements, reviews of the written statements, meetings in rooms that had too many people in them, and the specific experience of being talked about in the third person while present in the room, which Emily had a lifetime of practice with and which had not gotten more comfortable over the years. The man without a name she had learned through a combination of Rhodes's contacts and things she had pieced together herself that his name was Director Alan Voss, and that his title was one of those titles that described a function rather than a structure, which meant he operated in the spaces between defined structures, appeared twice more in those 4 days. Once in a formal setting with Hartwell and 2 other officers she did not recognize. Once alone, at the door of the room she'd been assigned at 6 in the morning on the 3rd day. He knocked twice and waited, which told her he had some manners. She opened the door. Walk with me, he said. They walked. He did not speak for the first 2 minutes, which she had learned was a characteristic of his. He used silence the way a good interrogator uses it to give the other person room to fill it. She did not fill it. She had learned that particular skill from a lifetime of being in rooms where filling the silence worked against her. He spoke first. The oversight body has reviewed the full record. The drive your colleague provided Fulton correct. He paused. He's going to be fine. I want you to know that. She had not asked, but she had been thinking about it. Thank you, she said. The vehicle that visited the staging area, Voss continued. We've traced it. The two individuals who met with Crest were intermediaries. They're part of a network that has been moving information between military planning channels and external parties for approximately 3 years. Garrett was a more recent addition. Crest was the access point. He stopped walking. She stopped with him. 7 operations in 3 years, he said. Tonight was the first time an operation failed to achieve its intended outcome. She understood what he was saying. 7 operations, and tonight was the first time the people sent into the field had survived. How many didn't come back, she said. It was not a question. The number is being determined, he said. It's part of what the oversight body is establishing. Some may have been recorded as operational losses that were accepted as part of combat risk. The word acceptable arrived in her mind again unbidden. There will be a full inquiry, Voss said. It will not be fast. It will not be public in most of its details. But it will be complete. He looked at her. Your account and the accounts of Captain Rhodes and his team are central to the evidentiary record. Without the detail of what happened in that canyon, and specifically without your account of the satellite communications, the command element's behavior, and the civilian vehicle, the connection between Crest and the network would be significantly harder to establish. She thought about that. She thought about climbing the ridge not knowing it would matter beyond the next 6 hours. Not knowing the canyon was one piece of something larger. Doing the math on what was in front of her, because the math in front of her was what she had. I didn't know any of that when I climbed the ridge, she said. No, he said. That's what makes it credible. He started walking again. She walked with him. I'm going to ask you something, he said. And I want you to give me an honest answer rather than the answer you think I'm looking for. I do that anyway, she said. I know, he said. That's why I'm asking. He paused. Corporal Carter, what do you want out of the service? Out of this situation? Out of the next chapter of whatever this is? She thought about it. She gave it the same consideration she gave to a difficult shot, not rushing to the answer, not performing certainty she didn't have, but also not hiding behind false humility when she knew what was true. I want to shoot, she said. I want to train people to shoot. I want the work I can do to be used for something instead of being managed away from anything where it might matter. She paused. I've spent 8 years being given jobs designed to keep me from doing the job I'm actually good at. I'd like that to stop. Voss nodded. He nodded the way a person nods when they've heard the answer they came for. There is going to be a formal review of your record, he said. All of it, not just last night, your assessments, your evaluations, your reassignments, every instance in which your capabilities were evaluated, documented, and then systematically redirected. He looked at her with the directness that was his consistent characteristic. What that review finds is going to be difficult reading for some people. It was difficult living, she said. He stopped walking again. They were outside now. She was not sure when they'd come outside. She had not been paying attention to the route. The base was waking up around them, the early morning machinery of people and vehicles, and the specific sounds of a military installation starting its day. The inquiry suspended the procedural action against you, he said. What I am telling you now informally before it becomes formal is that the procedural action is not going to be reinstated. He said it cleanly without preamble. What you did on that ridge is not going to be treated as a violation. It is going to be treated as what it was. She looked at him. What was it? She said, not challenging him, wanting to hear him say it. A decision made by the right person at the right moment, he said. With the right tools, the right training, and the right judgment. Everything the institution is supposed to produce and frequently fails to. She held that for a moment. Okay, she said. He almost smiled. It was the same almost smile from the debrief room. That's all you've got, okay? I've been waiting 8 years for someone in authority to say something like that, she said. I don't have a speech prepared. He did smile, then briefly, completely, The smile of a man who found something genuinely worth smiling at. It changed his face entirely and was gone just as fast. There will be formal proceedings, he said. They will take time. In the interim, I'm recommending that you be temporarily attached to a training and evaluation role while the record review proceeds. It is not a lateral move. It is a forward position. He paused. Captain Rhodes has already been consulted. He had some thoughts about the appropriate scope of that role. She thought about Rhodes sitting next to Nguyen's bed in the dark. She thought about Webb's voice in the canyon saying, I'm starting to think maybe someone should have listened to her in the briefing. She thought about the briefing room 3 weeks ago and the chair along the back wall and the Major's smile. What did he say, she said. He said, and I'm quoting directly, Voss said that the best use of Corporal Carter's skills would be anything that involves other people learning from them, and that anyone who tried to assign her to a communications trailer again should be required to spend a night in a canyon first. She looked away for a moment. She was not going to cry in front of Alan Voss at 6 in the morning on a military base. She had not cried in front of anyone since she was 17 years old. She was not planning to start now, but something in her chest required a moment to settle, and she gave it that moment. Tell him thank you, she said. Tell him yourself, Voss said. He's in the medical bay. He's been there most of the night again. She nodded. Voss turned to leave. He did not say goodbye. He was the kind of man who ended conversations the way a period ended a sentence completely without apology. She called after him. Director. He turned. The people who didn't come back, she said, from the other 6 operations. Will their families know? He held her gaze. That is one of the things the inquiry is going to establish, and he said, I can't promise you what the answer looks like. I can promise you that it is being asked. She nodded. He left. She stood outside for a moment in the early morning and thought about every person who had ever sat in a briefing room in the back row or been redirected to a safer role or been told that the place they saw clearly was not viable. She thought about all the ridges that had gone unoccupied because the people who could see their value had been managed away from them. She thought about how many of the 7 other operations might have ended differently. Then she went to find Rhodes. He was where Voss had said he was, in the chair next to Nguyen's bed. Nguyen was awake this time, sitting up slightly, his color better than it had been. Webb was there too, standing against the wall with a coffee cup that appeared to be his second or third, and Dominguez was in the chair on the opposite side of the bed, looking like a man who had slept, but not enough. Harmon was there too, his leg bandaged and elevated, sitting on the edge of another bed across the room. He was the one who saw her come in first. There she is, Harmon said. The quality of the room changed when he said it, not dramatically, quietly. The way the air in a room changes when something is acknowledged that everyone has been holding. Nguyen looked at her. He was a man of few words, even in good health, and he was not in good health, so he used the words he had carefully. They told me, he said, about the ridge. You were a little busy, she said. Yeah, he said. He looked at her for a moment with the look of a man assembling a sentence from components that did not usually go together for him. My kids' names are Marcus, Danielle, and Theo, he said. I want you to know their names. She understood what he was giving her. She received it. Marcus, Danielle, and Theo, she said. He nodded. He closed his eyes. He was tired, and it was allowed. Rhodes stood, and they moved to the hallway. Webb followed. Voss talked to me, Rhodes said. I know, he told me. He quoted you. The canyon thing, Rhodes said. The canyon thing, she said. Webb looked between them. What canyon thing? I'll tell you later, Rhodes said. You always say that, Webb said. And I always tell you later, Rhodes said. Webb conceded this with a tilt of his head. Rhodes looked at Emily. The training role, he said. It's real. It's not a holding pattern. Voss has authority to structure it the way it needs to be structured, and he's going to structure it the way it needs to be structured because he understands what's at stake. He paused. There's going to be a formal review board in approximately 6 weeks. I will be testifying, Webb will be testifying, Dominguez will be testifying. Every member of the team who was in that canyon is going to stand in front of that board and say what they saw and what it meant. I know, she said. I want you to be ready for the fact that it is going to be thorough and it is going to be uncomfortable. And some of the people on that board are going to be resistant to the conclusion the evidence points toward, because the conclusion the evidence points toward requires them to look at how their institution has been functioning and decide that certain things are not acceptable anymore. She almost smiled. The word acceptable, It kept finding her. "I've been uncomfortable before," she said. "I know you have," he said. "I've read your file, all of it. Not the official summary, the actual file." He held her gaze. "The things that were done to your career over 8 years, Carter, the reassignments, the evaluations, He stopped. He recalibrated. He was a man who had learned to manage what he felt about injustice by putting it into motion rather than into words. "It's going in the board record," he said. "Every bit of it. Context matters." She nodded. She did not trust herself to respond to that with anything more than a nod, because the 18 hours of no sleep and the 4 days of institutional machinery in the conversation with Voss had used up most of the reserve she kept for maintaining composure in front of other people. Webb, who had an instinct for these moments, said, "You want coffee? It's terrible. I've had 3 cups. It gets worse with each one, which is somehow compelling." She laughed. It came out of her before she had decided to allow it. The real laugh, the one she didn't produce, on demand, the one that surprised her when it happened. Webb looked pleased with himself in the specific way of a person who has accomplished exactly what they intended. "Yes," she said, "I want coffee." They went to get it. 6 weeks passed the way 6 weeks pass when they contain a formal board review. 3 separate oversight body interviews, 2 meetings with a federal investigative office, and the daily work of a training role that turned out to be substantially more significant than the word temporary had suggested. The training role was in precision marksmanship evaluation, assessing candidates for advanced sniper programs, developing curriculum for long-range engagement doctrine, and consulting on the tactical application of overwatch positions in complex terrain. It was, in other words, everything she had been redirected away from for 8 years handed to her at once, with the implicit acknowledgement from the people handing it that they should have given it to her years ago. She did not say that out loud. She did the work. The board review was thorough, as Rhodes had promised, and uncomfortable, as he had also promised. There were members who resisted, as he had predicted. There were long sessions in rooms that felt designed to exhaust patience, with questions that circled back to the procedural violation, regardless of how many times the operational record was entered into evidence. On the 4th day of the review, Rhodes took the stand and said something that stopped the room. He said, "I would like the board to consider a simple question. If Corporal Carter had followed protocol and stayed in her assigned station, 12 of my operators and 7 civilian hostages would be dead. The people who designed tonight's operation, including personnel now in federal custody, were counting on protocol to ensure that outcome. They built the operation around the assumption that the people in the field would follow the rules they were given because the people who gave them the rules had made sure those rules would produce a specific result. Emily Carter is the reason that result did not happen. The question before this board is not whether she followed protocol. The question is what we do with the knowledge that, in this case, protocol was the weapon being used against us." The room was very quiet when he finished. On the 6th day of the review, the board returned its finding. The procedural action against Corporal Emily Carter was formally closed. Her record was expunged of the reassignment notations that had accumulated over 8 years, the clinical language that had described her capabilities as unsuitable for advanced roles, and her precision as disruptive to unit cohesion. All of it removed from the official record, not because it was erased, but because the board formally found it to be inaccurate documentation of a demonstrated capability that the institution had failed to appropriately recognize or deploy. She received a formal commendation for her actions in the canyon, signed by Hartwell, and countersigned by 2 officers above him. She was promoted to sergeant. She was offered a permanent position leading the Precision Marksmanship Evaluation Program, with a mandate to develop new doctrine for the use of overwatch positions in complex terrain operations. The mandate specifically cited the tactical application demonstrated on the northern ridge of the canyon as the foundational case study. She accepted. On the day the promotion was formalized, Rhodes found her in the range where she had been working with a group of candidates, 6 men who had arrived with the standard combination of confidence and incomplete knowledge that most candidates brought, and who were leaving 3 weeks into the program with the specific humility of people who had discovered that precision shooting was a deeper discipline than they had understood. He watched her work for a few minutes before she saw him. She was in the middle of correcting a candidate's position, not his stance, not his grip, but the quality of his attention. "You're waiting for the shot," she was telling him in a voice that was patient and exact. The shot isn't something you wait for. You build the conditions and you let the moment arrive. The trigger doesn't move because you decide. It moves because everything else is already right. The candidate adjusted, he fired. The round hit within a margin that made the candidate exhale sharply with surprise. Again, Emily said. Now you know what it feels like. Do it again until it feels like something you built rather than something that happened to you. She looked up and saw Rhodes. She came to him at the edge of the range, pulling off her hearing protection. How are they doing? He said. Better every day, she said. Two of them have real potential. One of them might be exceptional if he learns to trust what he's already built. Sounds familiar, Rhodes said. She looked at him. A little, she said. He had something in his hand at a folded document. He held it out. She took it and unfolded it. It was a map. A terrain map of the canyon updated with current survey data. At the top of the northern ridge, someone had printed a name in clean block letters. Overwatch Point Carter. She looked at it for a long moment. The name was Voss's recommendation, Rhodes said. Hartwell approved it. It went through last week. The official designation is in the geographic registry now. She looked at the map. She thought about the climb, the cold rock under her hands, the sound of the canyon below her, the weight of the rifle on her back the moment she reached the crest and saw the battlefield laid out beneath her, like a problem she already knew how to solve. She thought about her father's voice telling her that the shot happened in the space between heartbeats. She thought about Marcus Danielle and Theo Nguyen, who had a father because of a ridge that everyone had decided was not viable. She folded the map carefully and held it in both hands. It's not a monument, Rhodes said. That's what Voss said when he put the recommendation forward. It's not a monument to what happened that night. It's a marker for the next person who looks at a map and sees a position that everyone else has written off, so they know someone was there before them. She looked at the map. She looked at the name. Emily Carter had spent 8 years being told to aim at things she could already hit, so that no one around her would have to reckon with how far she could actually reach. She had spent 8 years in the back of the room, doing the math on problems she was not supposed to know existed, waiting for the moment when the math mattered more than the permission. That moment had come in the dark on a ridge with a rifle and 31 rounds, and the only certainty she had ever needed, the certainty that she could see what others could not reach, what others would not, and hold the line at the place where everyone else had decided there was nothing worth holding. She had been right. The math had always said she was right. And now the ridge had her name on it, not because she had asked for anything, not because she had survived any particular set of circumstances, but because capability, real demonstrated, irreducible capability, does not disappear when it is ignored. It waits, it trains, it climbs in the dark. It takes the shot that everyone else decided was impossible. And it is still there in the morning when the light comes and the record is written and the question of who saved whom is finally completely permanently answered. She did not keep the map. Rhodes watched her fold it, and he expected her to put it in the breast pocket of her uniform, the way a person folds away the thing that finally proves they were right close to the heart, private, a small warm certainty to carry through the rest of a life. That would have been the human thing. After 8 years of being filed in the back of rooms, 8 years of being told her precision was disruptive and her capability was unsuitable. A person earns the right to hold the proof against her chest and never let it go. Instead, the next morning she pinned it to the wall of the range house, right at the entrance at eye level where every candidate would have to pass it on the way to the line. She used 4 clean tacks, 1 in each corner, the way she did everything without flourish, without wasted motion, exactly square to the world. A candidate stopped to read it that first day. He was young, the kind of young that has not yet learned the difference between being good and being lucky. And he squinted at the printed name at the top of the northern ridge. Overwatch Point Carter, he read aloud. He glanced at the patch on her shoulder, then back at the map, and the arithmetic happened on his face. Ma'am, is that you? It's a position, Emily said. It's a place on a map where someone stood when everyone said no one could. That's all a name on a map is, a note left for the next person. She nodded him toward the line. You're up. Show me what you built overnight. If you've stayed with this story this far, stay a little longer. Because the shot in the canyon is the part everyone remembers, and the part that gets retold, and the part that ends up in the briefings as a single astonishing line, a sniper on a ridge that wasn't viable. But the shot was 1 second, one crack with no echo because it needed none. What she built in the years that followed is the part almost no one tells, and it is the part that mattered more. The doctrine came first. The mandate the board had handed her was vague on purpose: a developed new doctrine for the use of overwatch positions in complex terrain operations, the kind of language institutions use when they want a thing done but are not yet sure they want their name on it. Emily read the mandate the way she read everything, as a problem with a precise interior. The problem was not how to teach people to shoot. People could be taught to shoot. The problem was how to teach an institution to listen to the one person at the back of the room who had already done the math. So she did not start with rifles, she started with maps. She took the terrain survey of the canyon, and she laid it flat on the table in the planning room, and she asked the candidates a single question that none of them had ever been asked in 8 years of their own training. She put her finger on the northern ridge, the one the original mission planners had marked non-viable, no ascent route disregard, and she said, who decided this was impossible, and what did they have to gain by being right? The candidates stared at her. Every map, she said, is a record of someone's assumptions. The terrain doesn't lie, but the notes on the terrain, the words viable and non-viable, acceptable and disregard, those are written by people. And people write what's convenient as often as they write what's true. Your job is not to read the map. Your job is to read the person who drew it. It was, she would later understand, the most subversive thing the institution had ever paid her to teach. Because it was not really about ridgelines. It was about the word acceptable that a man named Garrett had once scribbled in a margin beside a number that represented 12 human lives. She was teaching young soldiers to distrust the most dangerous sentence: in any operation it cannot be done, and to ask the only question that mattered underneath it: cannot be done by whom, and who benefits from the believing. The doctrine she wrote was 41 pages long. It contained almost no philosophy and a great deal of mathematics: ascent route, load analysis, angle of overwatch, geometry, the relationship between a position's apparent inaccessibility and its actual tactical value. But the first page, the one before the mathematics began, contained a single sentence that Hartwell would later read aloud at a conference of officers who outranked him in a voice that was not entirely steady. A position is not unreachable, it is only unreached. Accountability came second, and it came slower, the way it always does. Director Alan Voss had built his case the way she built a shot: patiently, in the space between the obvious facts, letting the moment arrive rather than forcing it. The architecture of the operation had been designed to fail and to bury the evidence of its design beneath the bodies of the men who carried it out. That was the thing that made Voss's voice go quiet when he finally laid it all out months later in a federal courtroom with no windows. The plan had not merely accepted that 12 men might die, it had required it. Dead men file no objections. Dead men do not survive to ask why the air support that was promised for the original timeline was, by some administrative coincidence, reassigned to a priority tasking that no one could later locate in any record. Garrett took a plea. Men like Garrett always take a plea because men like Garrett have always believed the paperwork is the world, and a plea is just more paperwork, a final form to fill out in exchange for a smaller cell. He did not look at anyone when he entered it. He had built his whole life out of not having to look at the people his numbers described, and he held to that habit to the end. Major Crest, the one who had smiled at the young woman in the back row of the briefing, the smile of a man dismissing a chair, did not take a plea. Crest believed in his own version of events with the unbreakable conviction of a man who had never once been wrong in his own narration of his life. He stood his trial. It did not go the way he had narrated it. When the board read the finding, Crest's face did the thing that Emily had seen on the faces of candidates who fired their first true shot: the sudden total recalculation of a person discovering that the world had been a different shape than they believed. The difference was that the candidates exhaled with wonder. Crest exhaled with something that had no wonder in it at all. But here's the part that mattered, the part Emily cared about more than any cell or any plea. The board did not stop at the men. It went after the system, the chain of permissions, the protocol that had been turned into a weapon, the architecture that let a man write acceptable beside a number and pass it upward without a single person in the chain being required to ask the obvious question. New procedures were written. A standing rule was established, plain and short, that any operation projecting casualties above a defined threshold required an independent assessment from outside the originating command, an outside set of eyes, a person at the back of a different room empowered to say no and have the no mean something. They called it in the Dry Registry of Military Procedure the Independent Terrain and Threat Assessment Requirement. The men who wrote it did not name it after her, but every officer who read the foundational case study attached to it knew whose ridge it had been written on. And that, Emily thought, was the better monument, better than her name on a map, better than the commendation in her file, because the map remembered one night. The rule would protect every night that came after it. The rule meant that the next 12 men who dropped into the black mouth of a canyon would do it because someone with the authority to say no had looked at the assessment and found it honest, not because a man in pressed civilian clothes had decided their lives were an acceptable line item. She had taken one shot in the canyon. The rule was the shot she got to keep taking every day for everyone she would never meet. The Nguyen's came in the spring. Petty Officer Daniel Nguyen, and it was a small, strange grace that he and Captain Rhodes shared a first name. Two Daniels who had survived the same canyon had spent 4 months relearning how to breathe with a chest that had been opened and rebuilt. The chest wound that Dominguez had kept pressure on the one that had nearly emptied him out on the canyon floor had healed into a scar that his children would later describe with the casual brutality of children, as looking like a river on a map. He had been told in the clinical language of medical boards that he would not return to operational status. He had received the news the way men in his line of work receive most news, by absorbing it, recalibrating, and asking what came next. What came next was a desk and then a teaching role, and then on a bright Tuesday in April, a long drive to a range house with 3 children in the back of the car and a folded piece of paper in his pocket. He found Emily at the line. She had her hearing protection on, and her attention narrowed to a candidate's position, and she did not see him at first. And so he waited the specific patient waiting of a man who has learned exactly what a person's full attention is worth, because he is alive on account of someone giving it to him once. When she turned and saw him, she went very still. "Sergeant Carter," Nguyen said. "Petty officer." She pulled off her ear protection. There was a long moment where neither of them said the thing because the thing did not have a shape that words made easily. Then Nguyen reached down and put his hand on the shoulder of the boy beside him, a serious boy of about 9 with his father's careful eyes. "This is Marcus," he said, and then the girl Danielle, and then the smallest one, a boy who was hiding most of himself behind his father's leg and showing the world one curious eye. "And this is Theo." He said the names slowly. He said them the way he had once said them to her over a radio that she had not been on, except that he had in a way because she had been told. Rhodes had carried the names up out of that canyon, and they had reached her, Marcus, Danielle, and Theo, and she had received them then the way she received them now, as the thing he was giving her, the precise inventory of what her shot had protected. Not a man who was someone's father. 3 children who still had one. "I wanted them to meet you," Nguyen said. "I wanted them to know your face. Not a name in a story, a face." Marcus, the serious one, stepped forward. He had clearly been coached on this moment and had clearly decided to do it his own way regardless. He held out his hand for her to shake the way an adult would, and he said, "Thank you for my dad." There are sentences that a person carries for the rest of their life, and Emily Carter, who had spent 8 years being told her precision was disruptive, who had stood on a ridge in the cold and reduced the entire world to a scope, and the wind and the math took that boy's small, dry hand and held it, and she found that the thing she had built her whole life to be good at, the stillness, the control, the breath held in the space between heartbeats, was not quite enough to keep her voice level. "You're welcome," she said. Later, Theo, the small one, the curious eye, wandered over to the wall by the entrance and stood in front of the map. He was too young to read most of it, but he could read his own family's understanding of why they were there, and he pointed at the printed name on the northern ridge, and he asked his father what it said. "It says the name of the place where someone stood," Nguyen told him, "so that we could keep you." The recruit came in the autumn. Her name was Mara Vasquez, and she arrived at the program with a file that Emily recognized so completely it was like reading a translation of her own. Disruptive to unit cohesion. Precision inconsistent with collaborative doctrine. Recommend reassignment to a support role suited to individual temperament. 8 years of the same clinical sentences dressed up as assessment that had quietly described a capable person as a problem because her capability was inconvenient to the people who outranked her. Vasquez did not expect to be good. That was the first thing Emily noticed, not the shooting, which was raw and undisciplined and occasionally astonishing, but the expectation. The young woman had been told for so long that she was a difficulty to be managed, that she had begun to manage herself to shrink, to aim deliberately at things she could already hit so that no one around her would have to reckon with how far she could actually reach. Emily knew that flinch. She had lived inside it for 8 years. So she did not correct Vasquez's grip or her stance or her breathing. She corrected the thing underneath all of it. "You're shooting to be acceptable," Emily told her on the third day in a voice that was patient and exact. "You're putting the round where you think you're allowed to put it. Stop. I don't want acceptable. The institution has enough acceptable. It is drowning in acceptable. I want the round where you can actually put it, and I want you to stop apologizing for the difference." Vasquez looked at her like the words were in a language she had been forbidden to speak. "The file followed me," Emily said quietly. "Same words. I know every one of them. Disruptive, unsuitable, inconsistent with cohesion. You know what those words mean when you finally translate them? They mean we couldn't make her smaller, and we found that frightening." She nodded down the range to the farthest target, the one she only assigned to candidates she had decided to take seriously. "Stop being frightening to people who should never have had authority over you. Be exactly as large as you are. Take the shot you can take, not the one you're permitted." Vasquez set herself. She breathed in slowly. She breathed out halfway. And then Emily watched it happen, watched the precise moment a person stops waiting for the shot and starts building it. She stopped breathing entirely, and in the space between two heartbeats, she let the moment arrive. The round hit the far target dead center. Vasquez exhaled sharp and startled and turned to look at Emily with an expression that was equal parts wonder and something close to grief. The grief of a person realizing how many years she had spent being smaller than she was on the instruction of people who should have known better. "Again," Emily said gently. "Now you know what it feels like. Do it again until it feels like something you built instead of something that happened to you." And she heard her own voice, and underneath it, distant and patient and unhurried, she heard her father's. "You don't pull the trigger. You let the moment arrive." A lesson handed down a chain that the chain itself had no idea it was forming, a man kneeling in cold grass beside a 6-year-old, to a woman on a ridge in a canyon, to a young recruit at a range learning for the first time that she was allowed to be the size she was. She called her father that night. He was older now, retired into the slow, careful days of a man who had spent his working life paying attention to small things and had not stopped just because the world had stopped requiring it of him. He still cleaned his glasses with the same two-folded motions. He still answered the phone on the second ring, never the first, because the first ring he had once told her was the world being impatient, and a man did not have to honor the world's impatience. "There's a place with my name on it now," she told him. "On a map, a real one, it's in the registry, a ridge." There was a silence on the line, not an empty one. The silence of a man receiving something, carefully turning it over, making sure he understood the full shape of it before he spoke. "The one you climbed," he said. It was not a question. He had heard the story, the parts she was allowed to tell him, and the parts he had assembled himself out of a father's understanding of his own child. The one they said couldn't be climbed. "That one. Good," he said. And then after a moment, in the unhurried voice that had been in her ears since she was 6 years old, holding a rifle that was almost too heavy, "I always knew you'd put the round where you could put it. I just didn't know the world would ever be smart enough to write it down." She closed her eyes. She was 40 years old and a sergeant and the author of a doctrine that officers above her read aloud, and she stood in the dark of her small quarters and let her father's voice tell her the one thing she had spent 8 years in one cold ridge waiting to hear someone with the authority finally say. "Thank you," she said, "for teaching me before anyone gave you permission to think I was worth teaching." "Permission," her father said, and she could hear the small, dry smile in it. "I never once asked anyone for that." They went back to the canyon in the second year. It was Rhodes's idea, though. Webb claimed it later, and Dominguez claimed it after that. And the truth was probably that it had belonged to all of them at once, the quiet collective decision of men who had survived something together and needed eventually to stand in the place where it had happened and prove to themselves that the place was just a place, that the canyon was only stone and wind and not the living thing it had become in their dreams. The terrain was unremarkable in daylight. That was the thing none of them were prepared for. In their memories, the canyon was a black mouth, a roaring throat of tracer fire, and white explosions, a geometry of death so total it had a presence, a will. In the flat, clean light of an ordinary morning, it was just a long, dry gash in the earth. Beautiful in the indifferent way that hard country is beautiful with a road feeding into it and a ridge rising up on the northern side. The ridge. They stood at the base of it, the survivors, and they looked up. And Webb Marcus, Webb 43, now built like a man assembled from separate machines, who had told Emily once that some arguments could only be won after the shooting, tipped his head back and looked at the climb, the real climb, the cold vertical problem of it, and he said the only word there was to say. How? Not a question. The same word he had said in the dark when the air support was 6 hours out and the math was impossible. The word a man says when there are no other words. Emily walked to the base of the ascent route. She put her hand on the first hold, the cold rock under her palm, the exact texture of it, a thing her body had not forgotten in 2 years and would not forget if she lived to be 100. And without saying anything, because there was nothing to say that the climb would not say better, she went up. She did not have to. She had nothing to prove to anyone standing below, least of all herself. But there is a difference between a position a person reaches once by necessity in the dark, with the lives of 12 men pressing down on every move, and a position a person reaches again in daylight freely, because it is hers. The first is survival. The second is something closer to ownership. She wanted to stand on the ridge that had her name on it, not as the woman who had been forced up it, but as the woman who could choose to climb it. The team watched her go. Marcus Webb watched, and Ray Dominguez watched, and Daniel Rhodes watched, and somewhere down the line of survivors, so did Kowalski with the arm that had never quite worked the same, and Harmon with the leg, and Tran. They watched her find the holds and move between them with the economy of a person who had reduced a thing to its essentials and kept nothing extra. They watched her reach the crest, and then they watched her stand up on the northern ridge at the top of Overwatch Point Carter and turn and look down at the canyon floor laid out beneath her like a problem she had already solved, and lift one hand just once to the men who were alive, because she had once stood exactly there. Nobody cheered. It was not a cheering kind of moment, but Rhodes, looking up, felt the thing in his chest that had turned to stone in a briefing room 2 years before the stone. He had carried through the whole operation, through the ambush and the casualties and the calm bureaucratic voice telling him the air assets were tasked elsewhere, felt that stone at last become something else. Not gone. You do not get back the men you almost lost or the night you almost died and have it become gone, but changed, set down, a weight finally placed on the one piece of ground that could bear it. Mara Vasquez took her qualifying shot the following spring. By then she was no longer the shrinking recruit with the translated file. She was a marksman of a quality that made the other candidates go quiet when she stepped to the line, and more than that, she had stopped apologizing for it. She had read Carter's doctrine. She had memorized the sentence before the mathematics. A position is not unreachable. It is only unreached. She had stopped flinching from her own size. The qualifying problem Emily set her was the hardest one in the program, and it was not an accident which one she chose. It was a position the candidates had all been told in their evaluation packets to disregard, marked non-viable, no clean line at an angle the doctrine of every prior program had written off as wasted effort. Emily had put it there on purpose. She had built the whole final test around a single question, the same question she asked every cohort on their first day with a finger on the canyon map, who decided this was impossible, and what did they have to gain by being right? Vasquez looked at the position. She looked at the word disregard printed beside it. And then Emily watched her do it. She looked through the word the way she had been taught at the person who had written it, and she made the small private decision that the word was wrong. She reached the position everyone had written off, she said herself. She breathed in slowly and out halfway, and then she stopped breathing entirely, and in the space between two heartbeats, she let the moment arrive. The crack had no echo, it needed none, and Sergeant Emily Carter stood at the back of the range in the place where she had spent her whole career being filed, and she watched a young woman who reminded her of herself reach a thing that everyone had decided was unreachable. And she understood finally and completely what Director Voss had meant when he stood in front of the recommendation and refused to call the ridge a monument. It's not a monument to what happened that night. It's a marker for the next person who looks at a map and sees a position that everyone else has written off. So they know someone was there before them. She had been the next person once. Her father had been the marker she climbed toward, a man who taught a 6-year-old before anyone gave him permission to believe she was worth it. And now she was the marker, and Vasquez was the next person, and somewhere down a chain that none of them would live to see the end of, there would be a person not yet born who would stand at the base of an impossible climb and find printed in clean block letters at the top the proof that someone had been there before. That is the part of the story almost no one tells. The shot in the canyon was 1 second. One crack with no echo, 430 meters, 31 rounds, and the only certainty she had ever needed. People remember the shot because the shot is astonishing, and the world loves the astonishing thing, the single impossible moment, the woman on the ridge, the round that arrives out of the dark and silences the gun that was killing her brothers. But the shot was never the point. The shot was just the proof. What she built afterward, the doctrine, the rule that would protect men she would never meet, the boy who shook her hand and said, "Thank you for my dad," the recruit who learned to be exactly as large as she was, the marker on the map for the next person, and the next, that was the real shape of it. Capability, real and demonstrated and irreducible, does not save one night and then vanish. It compounds. It teaches. It writes itself into the rules so that the next 12 men in the dark have a fighting chance. It climbs the ridge again in daylight freely and lifts one hand to the living. It hands the rifle and the breath and the patience and the refusal to be smaller down a chain that has no idea it is forming. Emily Carter spent 8 years being told to aim at things she could already hit so that no one around her would have to reckon with how far she could reach. She reached anyway, and the reaching did not end on the ridge the way the world's version of the story always ends it. The ridge was where it began. Because the question a story like this asked is never really who took the shot. The question underneath is older and quieter and harder, and it is the only question that ever matters in the end. Who saved whom? And the true answer, the one the canyon could not give, and the metal could not give, and even the map with her name on it could not quite give, turned out to be the largest answer there is. She saved 12 men in the dark. The 12 men carried her name out into the light. The light became a rule, and the rule became a shield, and the shield became a marker, and the marker became a young woman on a ridge that everyone had written off, taking a shot that everyone had decided was impossible, and being right the way the math had always said she was right. They saved each other. That is the whole of it. Across one night and 2 years and a chain of people stretching out past the edge of any single life, they reached down and held the line at the place where everyone else had decided there was nothing worth holding, and pulled each other up, hand over cold hand, into the morning. And the morning came, the light came, the record was written, and it was written true this time. And the ridge is still there with her name on it, waiting in clean block letters for the next person who looks at a map and sees a position that everyone else has written off, so they will know before they ever set a hand to the rock that someone climbed it in the dark before them and held it and lived and left a light on at the top.